Committee of Woking Borough Council. And you know what date it is? It's the 14th of December. This meeting is being held as a hybrid meeting with committee members present in the room this evening, whilst some officers are attending the meeting in person and some are connecting via Teams. The meeting is live streamed on YouTube. My name is Councilor Rochelle Shepherd-Dubay and I chair the meeting. The Planning Committee consists of 9 elected borough councillors who are supported by a variety of professional officers. Okay. This is a quasi-judicial committee with a formal set procedures which must be adhered to. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and then only those speakers who have registered to speak will be invited to address the committee. Now, no one else, including borough councillors, town and parish councillors, agents, applicants, objectors, or supporters, are permitted to address the committee, ask questions, or disrupt the meeting. Everyone has had the opportunity to comment on each application throughout the consultation process. Please note there is a strict time limit of 3 minutes per category of speaker, those being town and parish councils, objectors, supporters, and those borough members affected by the application. Members of the committee are more impressed by the quality of what you have to say rather than how long you speak, but above all, stay within your time limit, please. Following the registered speakers, members of the committee will discuss and debate each application and seek clarification from the council's professional planning officers in order to try and reach a decision. The decision is reached by the committee may or may not agree with the recommended presenting case officer. Finally, it is the committee's responsibility to determine any valid planning application presented before it using national and local planning policies and relevant decisions of the relevant planning inspectorate. Our role is not to suggest alternatives to the applications, nor to consider whether they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they are too costly, or whether there are alternative uses of the site or more suitable uses of land elsewhere. If you're joining us remotely, please ensure your camera is switched on only when you're speaking and your microphone is unmuted only when you are speaking. Thank you.
Councillor, I had to turn his.
Okay?
Yeah, thank you.
They just did. Any apologies?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Kaiser is on Teams this evening, so he won't be able to participate in the vote, but he will be able to participate in the discussion.
Okay, the minutes of the previous meeting. Members happy with the minutes of the previous meeting? Okay. Any declarations of interest? Stephen?
I'm not sure it is a declaration of interest as such. I do need, I think, to put it on record, however, that I objected to the inclusion of the land at Bridge Farm in the draft local plan. This is item 59 on our agenda, application number 212720. I objected to the inclusion of this site in the draft local plan, but it was included in the draft local plan. That process is now at an end. I therefore am approaching this as a completely fresh exercise, as a planning application, and I'm approaching the planning application with an open mind. I've obviously read the agenda. I'm waiting to hear the presentations of the officers and all other interested parties before I make a decision.
No applications to be deferred or withdrawn, Chair.
Now we're going on to application 220663, land south of Old Bath Road, Sonning.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen. For clarity, a very similar scheme, 201833, was approved in 2021 with policy compliant affordable housing contributions. The current proposal only provides a nominal upfront commuted sum payment of £100,000 towards affordable housing, although the applicant has agreed to a clause in the Section 106 legal agreement to secure further contributions via a deferred payment mechanism, should the viability of the scheme improve in the future. The application was deferred at November's Planning Committee for further information to be obtained from the applicant in respect of financial viability of the scheme. Hence, the only consideration of the merits of this case now open to discussion for the committee are in respect of financial viability. As requested, the applicant has provided a financial viability summary for the proposal, which is Appendix 3 of your item on the agenda, which identifies the following key points. Firstly, further detail on viability assessment process, including key inputs, such as profit margin, residual land valuation, and benchmark land value. Secondly, what has changed since the original application that has impacted on the scheme's economic viability, such as significant increases in terms of costs of building materials, finance interest rates, and stalled housing market prices. And thirdly, details of the offered deferred payment mechanism, and viability would effectively be reassessed through that mechanism using actual figures at the time of implementation rather than using estimates currently employed. In summary, the benchmark land value is the value at which it is considered the landowner would receive a competitive return. For this scheme, it is currently significantly higher than the current residual land value, which effectively defines the end development profit or land value for the scheme. The council's valuers have assessed this additional information and concur the proposal is currently approximately 1.1 million in deficit before financial contributions towards affordable housing have been factored in. In addition, the applicant has provided a confidential financial schedule detailing the full monetary figures, which is provided in part 2 of this report. The application is recommended for approval at the start of your agenda on item 57.
And the first speaker we have registered is Councillor Trevor Fisher of Sonning Parish Council.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and the members of the committee. I would first like to express thanks on behalf of Sonning Parish Council to Councillor Mickleborough for reading out her comments at the November meeting. That was very much appreciated. Sonning Parish Council still considers the 57 flats to be a fine development, but in completely unsuitable and unsustainable location. Sonning is still designated a limited development location, and the various proposals presently in the pipeline are considerably out of proportion for the small Sonning community. This is particularly true of this particular area of the parish. Having said that, the debate is now about the viability of the project. Sonning Parish Council is in complete agreement with the comments made by Councillor Wayne Smith at the November meeting. Councillor Smith said that if a proposed development of this type cannot be made viable on this prime residential site, something is very wrong. We also concur with both Councillors Wayne Smith and David Cornish when it was suggested that a dangerous precedent could be set here. This will be where an application is approved with the appropriate affordable housing contribution and then is resubmitted offering a vastly smaller amount. A document was recently shown to Sonning Parish Council by a local resident. This showed that the plot, consisting of the 3 residences, was being marketed as a very viable proposition. A simple search of the internet verified that this was the case and a screenshot taken. The Sonning Parish Council were invited to share the document with members of the Planning Committee, and you will have received that in the last few days. This shows a negotiable purchase price of £14 million, estimated build costs of £10 to £15 million, and that leads to a gross development value of £38 million. That works out as a profit of between 9 million and 14 million, which we suggest is very viable. Presumably, the purchase price would only be negotiable downwards, that would lead to an even greater profit. Whilst we all realise that exaggerated claims may be made when trying to sell on a development site, the Sonning Parish Council is surprised to see such a large anomaly between the figures presented to WBC, which we have of course not seen, and those in the marketing document. We feel that we have to be careful that we all, that's WC and Sonning Parish Council, are not having the wool pulled over our eyes. Much was said at the November meeting of the consequences of this application going to appeal. Hopefully, after the comments made by Michael Gove last week, WBC can recommence judging planning applications on their merits rather than being afraid of the planning inspector. Sonning Parish Council once again asks you to consider our points very carefully and to refuse this application. Thank you very much for your time.
And the next speaker is Michael Furniture.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. Feels like deja vu, this, doesn't it? Right, the marketing document mentioned was obtained by Sonning Parish Council, just to clarify that point. I'd just like to start off, but just a reminder, when this application came up at the last Planning Committee on the 9th of November this year, it was refused. This application has come back with undue haste and nothing has changed my views on it. It is still out of character with the area, despite what report states on page 38 under item 10 of the agenda. Policy TB06 states that the council will resist inappropriate development of residential gardens where they cause harm to the local area. I ask for this committee to do so. This is overdevelopment of an already congested area, especially with the side road to the proposed development already providing access with the Rams Rugby Club. This side road and other surrounding roads will be ever more chaotic on match days. The access from here will be onto the A4, which is already an extremely dangerous and busy road. At the moment, near to the proposed site on Pound Lane, the development of 13 dwellings has started. This could be changed to a care home. No one seems to know. Also, there is a recent separate application for 54 dwellings nearby. This area of Sonning, of the historic Sonning, will become far too congested. There are infrequent bus links and this site is too far away from local amenities such as in Charville, especially for walking, and I'll refer you to page 66 of the agenda where this is highlighted under the heading access to shopping facilities. Plus Sonning Railway Bridge, which has no pavement when accessing Woodley and accessing anywhere else. There needs to be motorised transport to access these facilities, especially if walking for the residents there is difficult. This counters our efforts to reduce CO2 emissions, despite what Appendix 3 of the agenda says. I strongly support the views of Sonning Parish Council, Theresa May as the local MP and others, including local residents, in objecting to this flawed and unpopular application. I would state this application is still unviable, even with a parking management strategy where there may well be sufficient parking, but vehicles have to travel to and from there. This would only lead to greater congestion on Sonning's already gridlocked and congested roads that are simply getting worse. There will be adverse highway impact despite what page 99 of the agenda states. Also, I still have concerns over the financial viability of this application. What is to stop this application coming back yet again because these cannot be met? He does have a history. This application is still deeply flawed and it's unsustainable. This unpopular application, as can be seen by the responses on the WBC website, must be refused. I'm on time, mate. My goodness me, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Stephen?
Thank you very much, Rochelle. I just really wanted to, if I may, just pick up on a couple of the points made by the objectors. Can I just start with Michael Firmage's comments? I mean, some of those, Michael, referred to the design and appearance and suitability of the built form. I think we established at our last meeting that that really is no longer an issue we can pursue, because this is pretty well exactly the same in built form as the approved application. So we couldn't now refuse this on those grounds. I think it's probably also important, not just in relation to this application, but more generally, to pick up on Trevor Fisher's comments on Michael Gove's recent announcements. I think it's really important to recognise that those announcements are not policy. There has not been any policy change. Mr. Gove has promised a prospectus between now and Christmas of what his changes might entail, or recommended changes might entail, but he's also said they will go out to consultation. And it is important to remember that when they go out to consultation, it's highly likely that the development industry will push back on some of the points he's trying to make. So we're a long way away from a change in policy. I think that's really important to recognise. But I would like to also pick up on the point about Trevor's drawing to our attention this marketing literature, which seems to present a very different picture of level of profitability. And can I ask our officers what weight or status we should attach to this compared with the material that's been submitted to us by the applicant?
Yes, thank you. Very little to no weight, I would say, in terms of that advert which has been put out by the landowner. I mean, effectively, he's looking to promote his site for sale, defining a gross development value that would appear attractive to a buyer. Those figures have not been checked by the council's valuer, and any future purchaser of that land, should obviously would be best advised to undergo their own viability exercise to kind of assess that. More than that, we couldn't really comment more on it, but it's not been assessed by a valuer, so we couldn't give it any significant weight.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd like to begin by thanking Councillor Fisher for his very balanced, pertinent assessment on behalf of Sonning Council, and also for staying focused on the issue of viability in that presentation. When we deferred this application at our last meeting, the reason for deferral was to seek answers to a number of very, very specific questions related to the viability of this particular development. The public documents pack does include answers to all of those questions, and it also includes reference to the process by which the viability of the project would be assessed when the homes are actually sold, so at a much at a date in the future. I felt reassured by the explanation, the answers to the questions that were that have been provided. I'll leave it there for the moment.
John Kaiser? John's online.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Let me apologise for not being there, but I have a stinking cold and I didn't think it was fair to give everybody in the council my cold just before Christmas. I hear what you say. I think we're pretty well boxed in with this. There's not much that we can do. How confident are the officers that they are going to be able to monitor this and make sure that when the properties are sold, that the full value of the sale of the properties will be taken into consideration, and we will then be able to rework the sum?
Thank you, John. In my committee report on page 15.3, it highlights about the deferred payment mechanism. Not all the detail of that has been resolved as yet, but effectively the developer will be prevented from disposing the last certain number of houses, yet to be determined, of the scheme until such time as a review had been completed and agreed with the council's valuer. So at some point through implementation, that deferred, more detailed valuation, taking account of values at that point in time when the scheme has taken place, will be taken into account. So, yeah.
So that will be on that will basically be the decision will be made on the sale of the properties. That's what you're saying.
I think the detail in terms of that would be, yeah, we've got to resolve. But as far as we've got so far is in terms of making sure that at a certain point through the scheme, we will do the viability and go from there. So I think that's still open for discussion in terms of at what stage we go at that point.
Well, I'm not very comfortable if we don't actually do it at the end when the properties are valued and sold. That's when I would expect it to be done. You could probably value them next year and they'd be worth a bit less. If they sell them the year after, they could be worth a bit more. I mean, it's a constant moving feast. The other thing I would make the comment of, Savills do talk about the reduction in house prices or property prices in Wokingham. I would agree with you. In some parts of Wokingham, the prices are beginning to fall. We're beginning to see that on the major estates, on the SDLs, some of the properties are now being offered with discounts. But I would add to that Sonning is a very desirable area. It is not one of our SDLs. It is not Lower Early. It is a very desirable area. And to talk about Sonning as you're talking about any flats that are being sold is, I believe, is smoke and mirrored by Savills. Thank you.
David?
Yeah, thank you. As Councillor Conway rightly pointed out, the prime focus of this reassessment of this application is due to the financial case and it's not having the details of the numbers at the last meeting. I've had a chance to have a look at it as everybody else. I'm obviously no expert in construction costs and I'll happily take the professional view of the BPS surveyors when it comes to actually construction materials. But I do have some knowledge in other areas. I'd firstly like to echo Councillor Kaiser's point. The Land Registry House Price Index here is for flats across the whole Wokingham area as an average. By nobody's imagination is Sonning average of Wokingham. It is a far-flung outlier for Wokingham, and that needs to be acknowledged in these numbers. Not only that, but Sonning is within easy striking distance of Twyford Railway Station, which has recently had the completed Elizabeth Line link opened. That, with anything, would push prices up in that area. And to pretend that there's a decrease there, I think is, I mean, it doesn't bear thinking, to be honest. Secondly, when I turn to the details on the spreadsheet provided, and I'm grateful for that, a couple of things catch my eye. Firstly,
Stop just a second.
Just to say, David, if you want to speak about those, you'll need to move into a part 2 session.
then we need to move into a part 2 session.
That needs to be.
Well,
Yeah,
there's no point, sorry, can I just be clear? There's absolutely no point in providing these numbers if we can't comment on them.
okay. We have, if we're moving into a part 2 session, we have to exclude the public from, and they can come back after that. If this is what the committee wants to do now, we can vote on it. And anybody want to propose this? And is there a seconder? Okay. So now we'll come to a vote. All those in favor of going to a part 2 session to discuss these details? All those again? I'm afraid you'll have to leave. You can come back, right? Shortly, we will come out and get you. But according to the rules, we can't give this information over.
For those of you on Teams who I'm about to remove from the call, please can you try and rejoin the call and wait in the lobby, and I will readmit you once we move back into the public session.
No, you can stay. Yeah. As a council, you can stay. Michael can stay as well, but. What?
The officer's responsibility is based on the
Yeah.
it's based on
Yeah.
system. Certain infrastructure.
Bring that out, I think. Yeah. Yes, I agree with you.
I think it's also.
Yeah. Okay. Bring that up. I'll let you speak after you speak and do that at the end. You'll in the radio. Yes, David? Okay, that's fine. Coffee finally.
Can you just
Coffee finally. Yes, it is. It's Starbucks coffee. Here's my, you can even see what I got if you really want to know.
Sorry, Rachel, the point, David beat me to it, but the question I was going to ask was,
Now, wait.
sorry, the question I was going to ask was, I appreciate
Would you please turn your cameras off, cameras and microphones off, please, while you're on Teams, unless you're speaking?
Yeah.
Yes. We're sorry, okay, we're sorry for excusing you all from this meeting. Believe me, it wasn't a very interesting discussion. It was a very technical discussion. Okay, Stephen, you had some questions? On the record now.
Thank you. Not so much questions as an observation. And that's basically, this sticks in the craw of all of us, I'm quite sure. We all have real skepticism about the submission made by the applicants in terms of the financial viability. But this has been assessed by our independent assessor, and that independent assessor believes these figures are acceptable. So I'm afraid, I think we're boxed in. We have no way out in this particular case other than to grant very reluctant approval. But I do think in the course of discussion, it's become very obvious something has gone horribly wrong here and that we need to try and find a mechanism for addressing it. We cannot, I'm afraid, do it through this planning application or through this planning committee, but I think we could make a recommendation that some consideration is given in the local plan update process to finding a means of trying to prevent this kind of thing happening in the future.
Rebecca?
Some of my concerns have been addressed by the clarification from Councillor Mickleborough about the payment, deferred payment. My questions really to the officers about the enforcement of this from my experience of Section 106 agreements that are not enforced with planning applications moving forward with developers. It really has a grave concern in my mind moving forward how this will be enforced. And also, does this set a precedent that when any developer comes forward with an application and they can provide documents to say that it's not viable, that other developers are going to be doing this, and they can set that as a precedent and say that we will not be able to provide contribution towards affordable housing because other developers have done so. So I don't know if I could have an answer to that, please.
Thank you. No, it wouldn't set a precedent. It's the deferred payment mechanism has been used in many boroughs, and indeed we used it on other cases across our council. That's referred to in the committee report under item 3, which refers to deferred payment mechanisms and indicates Rosa House, which was a planning application last year that we used it. In terms of monitoring, the applicant would have to apply for condition discharge, so we would be looking at that before they implemented, yeah, we would be in touch with them through that process. I guess we would diarise it and check the process basically. But it's tied down under Section 106, so it's a legal arrangement. So they would need to comply with the obligation of not just providing the initial contribution, but also in terms of going through that process, it's a legal requirement.
If I just come back on that, I don't think I've heard a real firm commitment that that will happen. That is my big concern here about moving forward with this section 106, because as we know, in other developments, we've got issues with those commitments being honoured going forward. And you're saying about diarising and the council's commitment to enforce moving forward if the developer doesn't see one of these commitments.
Do you want to go for it? Yeah, I mean, it may not happen. I mean, it's dependent on the viability of the scheme. So there is a requirement there for the scheme to the viability to improve before there is that any payment would be made. However, the obligation in section 106 would still require them to kind of demonstrate that at a certain point. So it's still a requirement. Whether or not there is a requirement to pay any additional contributions or not depends on the viability of the scheme at that point in time. The point is that at this point in time, it's not viable. 3 years, 4 years time, when they're part through the scheme, that may be different. We don't know. That's the crux of it.
Just to add to that, if I may, to sort of give a scenario of how this would work. Obviously, if the committee was to approve this, then our legal team would continue with the sort of preparation of a legal agreement and the relevant clauses within it, which would one of them being the deferred payment mechanism. Now, that mechanism would constitute a number of little phases within it. And if you imagine this scheme in front of us, we've got 3 blocks. So let's imagine it's 3 blocks, 3 phases. When they complete, or upon first completion of, for example, Block A, there would be an open book viability appraisal on completion of that, showing costs, showing where we are at that point in time. Okay, so that would be the sort of early stage. Then the council would either accept that, okay, or not accept it, and arbitration would be required. So again, we would have sight of the books, it's locked into the legal agreement. Solicitors wouldn't allow things to progress without the relevant discharge of the first part of that open book approach. Then, assuming the council accepted it, we would then move on. We'd have actual build costs at that point in time, and that would feed into the latter part of the mechanism. And then finally, at the end of development, and this would be before you either let or sell the final units or the last block, it wouldn't be released until you've shown the developer has shown the books again, showing the actual build costs. So what we're doing is we're able to get a snapshot in time, and if profitability increases, then contributions are due. If profitability decreases between now and whenever that may be, then obviously nothing would be due. But as I say, the mechanism is there to ensure we can recover any upturn in profitability at those different stages. But the terms of that would need to be worked out following agreement at committee in terms of the actual recommendation.
Yeah, I do share Councillor Marget's concerns, but I do thank the officers for their response on how the deferred payment mechanism would actually be implemented. Councillor Marget did mention something which I had, she referred to something which I raised in part 2 when the public were excluded. It was not actually a part 2 matter, so I would like to ask the officers the question that Rebecca referred to. And I'd like to ask officers to confirm that the deferred payment mechanism will be assessed on actual sold prices and QS certified construction costs, and also to comment on the views, expressed views of the Planning Inspectorate towards the use of deferred payment mechanism.
Sorry, could you repeat that again? I'm really sorry.
Okay, so So the question pertains to a document that is in the public documents pack. It's the letter from S106 management, and in specifically references to items 5.3 and 5.6, which refer to how the deferred payments would be calculated and the planning inspector's views.
Yes, that's correct. The deferred payment mechanism would cut in after the build had started, so we would get a true reflection in terms of actual build costs at that point in time. Whereas at the moment, we are looking at estimated costs, which may change over the period between now and when the scheme is began.
Thank you.
Chris?
So just going back to the deferred payments, the assessment of what is required should the scheme become viable, is that an entirely objective assessment, or is there a negotiation between the two sides? And if there is a negotiation and there's a failure to reach an agreement, how is that resolved?
It's not a negotiation as such. It's a case of our professional valuers that we've enlisted to look at this, because obviously we are planners as a profession. This is not something that we are qualified to kind of look at, but we engage and we have enlisted professional surveyors to look at that, and they will scrutinise what has been put in terms of the viability assessment. And it's an iterative process, certainly. It's taken a long time to get to this point in terms of agreeing, pushing back and double checking on certain aspects, like in terms of the price of building materials, etc. So yeah, there is a back and forth, and in my expertise, certainly in the cases I've dealt with, you never get absolute agreement, but you do get to a point where you're kind of very close in terms of viability. So the advice from our valuers who've looked at this is that it's in its current form, it's not viable before we even start looking at affordable housing.
So the assumption is that an agreement will be reached.
Not necessarily that an exact agreement will be reached at this point in time, because the whole point is agreeing or getting to a point where we agree either it's viable or it's not. If it's viable, then we're securing a degree of affordable housing. If it's not viable, then we're saying, OK, fine, we'll run with the recommendation as it is. But further down the line, when they start building, there is a clause in the 106 which is required to look at a deferred payment mechanism. And at that point, we'll be using real values of real build materials at that point in time, which gives us a much better indication in terms of what the end value of the scheme will be, because there are so many factors in that will vary: the build cost, the interest rates, etc. What they've, and sales values as well. So it's effectively, this is always a moving feast. From when the planning application was put in, we've had significant change in terms of economic position in the country. So if anything, it's got poorer in terms of the viability of the scheme.
David?
Thank you, Chair. I personally would have found it more reassuring if the document packet included some kind of forecast from the officers of what we might actually get back in addition to the £100,000. And I know you're going to say you can't guess the future, but actually you can. You've got in the document pack here, in table 4 is the house price forecasts up till 2025. And I'm sure the construction industry could give you equal forecasts for both building materials and indeed for prices. They won't be accurate, but they'll give you some idea of what's coming forward. And at least we'll have some kind of forward-looking baseline to measure against. And it's a shame we haven't got that.
I think it's a real shame that we can't get 40%, because this is what we do need to get in Wokingham for viability of the town and viability of the society here. I think that's very important. Perhaps we need to put it into the borough design code so it becomes more requirement rather than option based on profit and loss. I don't think anybody's going to lose money selling houses in Wokingham right now, even with the costs going down and the prices going down. I don't think they're losing money, really. I haven't seen a developer coming out with a tin cup and saying, please, can you give me a 2 pence for something. Okay. John is next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just at one point, I think I agree with Stephen. We are pretty much boxed in with this. But
You're next.
we spoke about viability, and what viability is can the developer make enough profit? Now, we've established with the viability calculation that there is enough profit. If there is an uplift, why, as a council, would we expect half of that uplift? Why would we not get all of that uplift, having already established that it's viable with the percentage that we've built in? We are the losers here, right, at the end of the day, and any uplift in the process of these houses, if there is a change, we should not be getting 50% of it. We should be getting 100% of it.
Officers?
It's in the uplift. Thank you, John. Appreciate the question. It's the theory behind developer profit and the affordable housing contributions. The council is not making profit, and the council can't make profit. The council is, where possible, able to require affordable housing contributions. If the profit, let's assume this scheme came in afresh and it was profitable, but not to the extent that it could pay or contribute 40% affordable housing. If it could only contribute 20%, say, the developer would still have to make a return, because otherwise, if we were to take the developer's return or insist upon zero profit, then no one would develop the site and it will be sterile. So from a kind of the theoretical perspective, the council must make developing land viable in order to recover a proportion as affordable housing. Now, we can't cap. Planning is, we're not financial advisors. We can't necessarily predict or forecast. We can't make too many assumptions ourselves. We can only involve our independent valuers. We can only provide a recommendation. We can only provide the relevant information in the part one for debate. But when it comes down to developer profit, local planning policies do not have the ability to control, restrict, cap, or prevent developer from making profit. All we can do is, where viable, recover some contribution towards our affordable housing up to the policy level of compliance.
Okay, I fully understand that, and that's well explained, and we accept that this site is viable if we do not charge for any at this current moment in time. The viability of this site is okay. It meets the criteria that the developer wants to develop it at. So what I'm actually saying is, in the event that we sell, the properties are sold, they're sold for more money than the developers estimated today, which we should get the allowance up to the 40% or whatever the percentage is in our local in our local planning. We should get the maximum of the uplift, all of the uplift up to that 40%, provided we leave that with developer with the margin that they've put forward in this paper. And I do not believe sharing the profit with them is a fair deal.
So the developer profit level is something that would be agreed with the council and the developer as part of that deferred contribution mechanism. Okay. And it would be payable at whatever percentage was agreed. So, for example, some authorities negotiate 60% for the council and 40% for the developer of those relevant profits that are recovered. In many cases, that might be 50-50. It's not for me to say here and now, John, but as we've said before, that's kind of we've kind of exhausted as much technical advice as we can give at the moment.
Okay, and thank you for that. I mean, what I would suggest to the people sitting around the table, I can't unfortunately vote, is I would suggest that you vote for this, provided that the developer agrees that any uplift over and above the percentage that they've worked in their viability will go to the council to pay for affordable housing up to a percentage of 40%. And without that, I would suggest that you good people in the room don't vote for it.
Wayne, oh, yeah, Ms. Wayne, please, in the future. Thank you.
Andrew, S106 management, who are these people?
They're the applicant's valuers.
All right.
So they initially put in a viability submission with the application to say that the scheme was unviable.
Yeah.
We enlisted the aid of our consultant valuers, went back, another submission went back, went to committee, and then we've got the additional submission. So yeah, they're acting on behalf of the applicant.
That answers a lot, because that just builds on David's question. You know, you can take a lot out of the southeast prices, but as I've said earlier, this is Sonning, and apparently, according to the marketing literature, it is an up and coming area. Take that of what you will. You mentioned earlier, Brian, open book. I thought this was certified. Are you absolutely correct? It's open book, or are these QS certified reports in this? Because I've got a very different. When I talk open book, it's very different to QS certified reports. Do you think that is absolutely right? We're going open book on this?
Thanks, Wayne. Yeah, so the terminology open book is used to describe a developer providing financial viability information to the council, showing the books. So it's not in relation to either any QS or any other particular profession within that. So it is terminology, a phrase, a turn, open book approach.
Finished.
Al?
No, I haven't finished.
Oh, you're not finished.
I'm
I
not
thought you
getting
said
away
you
that
finished.
night.
You're not finished. Okay.
I agree with what Stephen and John said. We are boxed in, but I think the mechanism is very simple. If you want to take on a development, you adhere to the prevailing rate of social affordable housing, i.e. 40%. Right. So you then don't go down this dreadful route. And I absolutely agree with you, Andrew. You are not a valuer. You're not a QS. You're a brilliant planner. Right? You are. But we get into this complete muddle, as we've done with this one, where you have this issue where, let's be clear, the only issue here is they've paid too much for the land. It's not rocket scientists, it's what day one of secondary school, mathematics. So what we need to, and I don't know how we do this, but I think what we've got to get to within this council is a principle that if you want to build in Wokingham Borough, you adhere to the prevailing rate, which was in the old local plan, 40%, not up to 40%. So therefore, you have to buy the land so you make it viable so you can hit that target. So we wouldn't have any of this mess that we've gone through tonight.
Thank you, Wayne. I think that hits on an important point. And I think, it's kind of recognised nationally now that the focus of national policy is now on viability testing at the plan making stage, rather than leaving it to a late stage when the development is in front of us, ultimately to prevent this kind of thing from happening. So when planning policies, when sites are being allocated, the testing of viability is done at that early stage, so we don't have to be here now talking about it.
Sorry, I absolutely agree. I fundamentally do not like this application. I fundamentally think it's wrong, and it's not right that we're building 57 houses in Sonning and we're not getting any contribution for social housing. I think it's absolutely wrong.
Al?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, just as we move to the close on this, I mean, this is the second application I've looked at today where viability test has ruled out contributions to social housing. I fear this is a trend for the future, and that anybody who's pretty careful putting together a set of numbers such as this will very easily prove a site to be unviable as a means of avoiding their obligations. And I hope one positive that comes out of this today is to you as officers that you know you've got the support of this committee behind you, that we are not simply going to rubber stamp something simply because someone assumes they can make a lack of viability case. I also think that although the experts that you go to assess this in terms of construction, I couldn't comment. I think on some of the other commercial aspects, as we alluded to earlier, there are certainly some points there that may have been more rigorously examined.
Stephen?
Thank you very much. I agree with you, Wayne. I feel exactly the same. I don't feel at all comfortable about approving this. It is wrong. And life would be a lot simpler if we got affordable housing provided on site without commuted sums. But sometimes commuted sums can help us to develop elsewhere, and sometimes very, very small sites, it's not appropriate. So my question, and this is an important question I hope that officers will be able to answer, is if we were to go down the line that John was suggesting, that we agreed to grant planning permission, could we attach to it the condition that he was requiring, which if I understand correctly is that we, through this deferred payment mechanism, secure the 40% contribution required before the developer then makes further profit on the site? Is that something that we can do in planning terms?
Will the officers answer that, please?
The detail of the deferred payment mechanism would be contained in section 106. So the clauses, the triggers, that would be listed there. The suggestion in terms of the amount that was being proposed, I don't think the applicants would accept. So I'm not sure where that would leave us with concluding a section 106, basically, if that was a fixed requirement of the planning committee. Because no developer is just going to continue with maybe the last block if the amount of affordable housing is way above what they initially envisaged.
If it's 40%, they know what they're initially envisioning.
If we cannot attach a condition, to that effect, can we put in an informative stating the committee's wish that we maximise the amount of contribution through the deferred payment mechanism, not a 50-50 split?
So the requirement to have a recommendation subject to something which would be contained within the legal agreement as part of a clause under deferred payment mechanism, it would need to be in front of you now in order to make the recommendation subject to it, because we don't have it and it would be subject to negotiation. We wouldn't be able, ultimately what you'd be asking would be, it would be a recommendation or accepting an approval subject to negotiation on a clause within the 106, and there's no guarantee that clause will be accepted, and then we would have to either bring it back for members in its final form, so whatever that clause may be, let's assume whatever it is, 70-30, whatever the clause, then we would have to come back and present that to be voted on, because at the moment it's nebulous, it could be anything.
Can I just come back quickly, because that assumes that it's a condition. I was just suggesting if it were an informative, would that make it easier for our wish to be expressed, but not tie your hands to the same extent?
It would certainly express the committee's wishes, but it would have no teeth, nor it would be, it's not, again, an informative is bringing the attention to something which is not related to the planning permission itself. So other legislation, other regulations that must be adhered to. In this case, we wouldn't be in the realms of a planning condition anyway. We'd be in the realms of a clause within the legal agreement, and that clause would probably involve some horse trading between the developer and the council's legal team and valuer to finalise a number that everyone was happy with. Now, obviously, that could occur prior to a vote, another committee, or it dependent on whether members believe it is necessary for this scheme to be acceptable.
There's an informative before the committee here. proposed. Does anybody want to second it? If they haven't proposed, okay, you didn't propose it.
I'm merely asking a question. I wonder whether a condition could be that before the legal agreement is signed, the committee has sight of the deferred payment mechanism.
Okay. John, you have a question, and this is the last question. We're going to a vote after this, please.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I understand what's being said, and I can see what Stephen's trying to do. But what I don't understand, I do not no planning application is approved until conditions are discharged, basically. Okay. Now, my view is there is nothing stopping us putting in the conditions that we require a percentage of affordable housing, but that would only be payable on the event that the profit exceeds what the developer expects at the end of the development of the site. It's quite simple. If you say you're going to sell these flats for 500 grand, let's say, and they end up selling them for 600 grand, that uplift we could use to deliver the affordable homes that we need in the borough, albeit be commuted. It's not rocket science, this, and I do not take your argument that we can't do it.
Thank you, John. Officers can do it. I think what the committee is kind of centering on now is the ability to either defer to officers to agree that percentage, which we don't have right now. So ordinarily it would be a recommendation to approve subject to conditions and legal agreement, defer to officers to finalise the particular details of the clauses within the legal agreement, which we don't have at this present time. Rather than a condition, because if we put a condition on locking in any percentage or any details, it would instantly, if anything changes, which it ultimately will, and we end up with 39% or 1%, whatever it might be, that condition would be in breach, and the developer will either appeal the condition or come in with a section 73 to vary the condition to reflect the reality of the legal agreement. So we would never put such details in the condition because it would instantly be severed from the legal agreement and the reality on the ground.
Okay, John, are you proposing anything?
Sorry, can I just say, I'm not talking about the percentage. I'm talking about the actual uplift. And if you're saying that you will go away and negotiate with if you go away and negotiate with them and they accept that they're happy with the percentage that they've put forward, anything over and above that, they will contribute to us as affordable homes up to a maximum of 40%. Okay, not as a minimum, but up to a maximum. And I would suggest that if you feel you could do that, it might be a good idea to defer this and bring it back once you've made those negotiations.
Okay, well, yes, please, Wayne.
I'm now a little bit confused.
I think the whole audience is as well.
So are we sort of talking in code here around what this percentage is? Because we've got on the table from the previous planning committee where this was deferred, the amount of seal payment, which was from X to Y. So that's not in part 2. That's all here. Call it 100,000. I think that's the sum. So are we saying, based on what John has just said, and I think what you were saying, Stephen, although I'm trying to work through, are we saying that if the sale of these properties were X, based on the figures that we can't talk about, went up by 4%, that 4% would come back in the form of a seal payment? But isn't that then part of the, if I'm correct, if that is correct, what I've just said, isn't that all part of the deferred payment mechanism? Is it? So if that is part of that, what extra are we asking for? That's my question.
Okay, so the Woking Borough Council, this application proposes a profit share approach. Okay, so we recover When profit increases, we recover a percentage. The details of that have not been agreed. So we would apply a formula in that calculation. Okay. But obviously that detail would come following any recommendation. There are plenty of formulas. There's plenty of examples. We talked about 50-50. We've talked about 60-40. There's lots of different agreements which can be used and must be negotiated on either by our affordable housing team, our legal team, and our external valuers. Each specific deferred payment mechanism is case specific, and it's at the discretion of us. Okay, so there isn't one rule for all. Okay, and ultimately, we can't give you that number here and now. We can only give you the mechanism for which to secure it.
Okay. Okay.
So either got to be.
Is there a proposal to defer this?
I think based on what Brian just said, based on what Brian's just said, what John has said and what Stephen said, I think the only cleanest way is to defer it.
Are you proposing that?
Yes.
And it's seconded by David. There's a vote for this to be proposed.
Why can't we just get specific to the reason, the specific
I guess it's to work.
Do we have the specific reasons why we're deferring this?
specific reasons why?
So in that sense, they've got to.
So the point that Brian's just made, there are various mechanisms in terms of variations and agreeing the formula for profit share.
Yep.
We don't have those here this evening. They need to be negotiated. Once they're negotiated, they can come back at the next committee and we can take it through the process.
So to clarify, it would be to seek details of the exact deferment payment mechanism.
Yes.
Chair, can you put your microphone on, please? I can't hear you.
Okay, it's passed. This application has been deferred until we get this information.
Thank you, Chair.
It's deferred until the next committee meeting. Hopefully, we'll get the information. Okay, we're going on to item number 58 unless we want to be here through the morning. Thank you. Yes, Erickson. Can you get hold of him possibly?
I'm sure he's there. He just
But Tarek, are you there?
Hello, yes, I am here. Sorry, the microphone keeps on cutting out. Thank you, Jay. Good evening, everyone. This presentation will address the householder application at Cherry Trees along Leming Hill Road in Wokingham. The scheme involves the erection of a two-storey side extension and raising the roof to create habitable accommodation, following the demolition of the existing double garage, and also includes changes to fenestration. Here's an aerial image and block plan of the application site. This application was deferred at the November Planning Committee to allow for a site visit to be undertaken to aid the committee in understanding the relationship between the application site and properties along Dorset Way. My officer report notes that the difference in ground level between the application site and properties along Dorset Way is approximately 1.5 metres as a whole. A plan has since been submitted by the agent, which shows that the ground level of the application site is set 1 metre higher than number 51 Dorset Way. It should also be noted that small trees were recently replanted along the rear common boundary, as observed during the site visit. These trees are anticipated to provide screening and subsequent privacy in the near future. Overall, the proposed development remains acceptable on character, neighbouring amenity, trees and landscape, ecology and highway grounds. As such, conditional approval is recommended. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Kelly?
And Tarek, if you could share Mr. Kelly's slide from the start of his speech, thank you.
Good evening, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. Without directly quoting the relevant guidelines as I did in the previous meeting, I again intend to highlight where the current application runs counter to the provisions and protections that are called out in Wokingham's planning guidelines. First, it would not be subservient to its current form. Second, it is already acknowledged that it would be too close to its rear boundary edge. Third, it would have a highly detrimental impact on the current rear garden privacy that the Dorset Way properties enjoy. In the case of 51 Dorset Way, it would in addition remove entirely the privacy from all rear-facing rooms. The proposed mitigation to counter this loss of privacy would take many years, if ever, to be fit for purpose. Fourth, by virtue of its higher elevation, and we'll come back to the submission later, compared to Dorset Way, its large footprint, its much smaller plot depth than is typical for Limmerhill, as can be seen on the slide behind you and to the side, and its consequent positioning close to the rear boundary edge, it already has an overbearing impact on the Dorset Way properties that is greater than that of any other dwelling on Limmerhill with respect to their neighbours. Granting this application would serve to exacerbate this impact more. In terms of the submission the late submission that came in, potentially there might be a metre to the rear of our garden, but to say that it is only a metre between where our house is located and where the bottom of their house is patently incorrect. It is, I mean, our garden rises up to our fence, and then there's the 60 centimetres, which it then rises, which is almost to their garden, and then it rises a little bit more. It is not 1 metre. At the time of the original bungalow was demolished and the site split to build both Cherry Trees and its sister bungalow, planning deemed it inappropriate to have a 2-storey dwelling on the site. Planning got it right. Now, having had an opportunity to visit the site yourselves, I would ask you to please arrive at the same decision once more. Thank you. Do I switch this off as well?
Nigel Rayner, the applicant, please.
Good evening. Thank you. In the short time I have, I would like to provide some background to the motivation for the project, 2 particular design considerations and the issue of the boundary screening. As with most of us here, my wife Trudy and I have ageing parents, and having found what we'd hoped could be our forever home, we are looking to create a flexible multi-generational space that can accommodate extended family visits whilst eventually allowing us to remain in the home for as long as possible. It's this issue of ageing that's actually one factor that's an influence in the design. As a health professional, my wife Trudy is keenly aware of the many studies that show we should be encouraging older people to live in properties with stairs as long as possible due to the extensive bone, heart and mental health benefits from increased capability to perform daily living functions. Another influence on the design has been our neighbours. During conversations with them in early 2021 on the boundary fencing, all 3 households on Dorset Way made their views perfectly clear that they felt we should not be able to develop Cherry Trees beyond its current size. We have therefore worked hard with our agent to come up with a design that allows us to achieve our goals without a full height 2nd storey, by making use of the site's slope so the extension's ground floor is lower than the rest of the property and retaining over 75% of the property as single storey. Further, we went through the full pre-application process specifically to ensure that the proposal is compliant, which we believe it is. Indeed, the planning officer's report states what is proposed is modest and within the borough design guidelines. We are also conscious that we're making sure that we take account of the whole site, and a key part of this is the boundary line screening. The boundary fence between us and Dorset Way was rotten and under increasing pressure from an ugly and unmanageable Leylandii hedge. This was in danger of causing encroachment and subsidence, and the decision was taken with our neighbours' agreement to remove the hedge, replace the fence and replant. Given the costs to us of this, it was not a decision taken lightly. Having removed the hedge, we have now replaced the full 130-foot length of the boundary with Dorset Way with a more secure and better quality fence. And to date, we have also replanted 17 3-metre high trees along the rear fence line to provide screening. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that this project is our attempt to create a long-term home to suit changing needs whilst being mindful of our neighbours' wishes. It is now 17 weeks since we submitted this application, and I would ask the committee to reach a clear determination either way to end the current uncertainty for all parties involved. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Adrian?
Good evening. Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the Planning Committee for visiting the Dorset Way residents on site. I hope that all aspects are clear to the committee members that attended that meeting. The Cherry Trees Bungalow is a large bungalow on a large site at the crest of Limmer Hill, approximately 1.5 to 2 metres higher than the Dorset Way properties. Since the bungalow is very close to the rear boundary, which is the Dorset Way boundary, it is a very dominant feature already, which in effect already obscures light and blanks out some of the trees that are behind it. The planning application with the addition of a second story will create significant height and mass. The specification of large glazing on the first floor will provide grandstand sightlines to the gardens and properties in Dorset Way. In the garden of 51 Dorset Way specifically, 100% of the garden will be visible from the second floor of the bungalow. In addition, every single room in the house will be completely visible from that same glazing. There is potential for excessive oversight and, in my view, absolute invasion of privacy. It's a bad design, which is, in my view, wholly unnecessary, since this large site can easily accommodate a single-storey extension. In the previous planning committee, the statement was made that 2-storey buildings on Limmer Hill are already the norm. And therefore, this plan to go to 2 stories was in keeping with adjacent properties. This is not factual. During the site visit, from the aspect of Dorset Way, you can only see bungalows. If you stand on crates and peered into the distance, you can just see the top of a 2-storey building. These 2-storey houses are not adjacent to these properties. They are on the other side and the other end of the road at Limmer Hill. Previously, it was also stated that the gardens in Dorset Way are not compliant with guidelines, being 9-point-something metres long, therefore did not meet the guidelines. When we talked about guidelines before, it was stated that the application was a few centimetres over the 22 metres minimum guidance for a 2-storey extension overlooking these properties. Sorry?
Your time is up. Can you sum up? Pretty quickly?
Yeah.
please.
I hope that previous applications were rejected on this site for 2 stories. I hope you do the same thing.
Just a question, if I may. The point that's just been made by Adrian was made by Mr. Kelly earlier on about 2-story applications being refused on the site for. Can we just get an officer view how much weight should be attached to that?
Hello, thank you. I believe each application should be taken on its own merits and pros and cons in this. And in this instance, I believe that the 2-story side extension complied with guidance and wouldn't adversely impact the character of the area or the neighbouring properties, particularly along Dorset Way.
Yeah, this is really a comment back to the officer. It doesn't impact on my view of the whole application. But when we saw it last time, I commented that what is now on page 144, section 16, which describes the overlook onto number 51 Dorset Way, I felt was inaccurate as a commentary from the papers. Having visited the site, it's clearly inaccurate. The whole of that garden is visible from the windows at Cherry Tree, or where the windows are supposed to be, especially the areas of most utility, being the patio area at the top of the garden next to the house. And furthermore, the only way that is visible from 53 Dorset Way is if you actually hang out the window or have some kind of periscope. It doesn't actually alter my overview of the application, but I do ask officers in future to make sure the narrative we get is entirely accurate. It would then ease the passage of these applications through this committee quite considerably.
Anybody else? Then we'll go to a vote. All those in favor? We have a proposer for this, please. Anyone? Proposing either for or against this?
I propose that we accept the officer recommendation.
Is there a second? All those in favor? Okay. All those against? All those abstaining? The application is passed. Requesting a bed. Reclining chairs. Sophie? Hello, sorry, I'm looking for you on the line.
We can't hear anything.
We're going forward right now. We're trying to get the presentation online right at the moment.
Screen. Okay. Thank you, Chair, and good evening. This proposal is a hybrid planning application in that it seeks outline planning permission for up to 200 dwellings on the site, with full planning permission sought for access into the site, which would be taken from the A4 New Bath Road. All other matters relating to the detailed appearance, landscaping, layout and scale would be detailed for approval at the reserved matter stage. The application site is located to the northwest of Twyford and extends to an area of approximately 12.2 hectares. To the east of the site is the Henley Branch railway line, whilst to the west is the River Loddon. The A4 New Bath Road lies to the north of the site, and beyond the southern boundary of the site are 2 dwellings and a children's nursery. The above slide shows the location of the site in the context of the existing settlement boundaries. As can be seen, the site adjoins but is not located within the existing major development location of Twyford and is therefore in the countryside. However, the site is not located within the Greenbelt or a conservation area. Whilst the site is not currently allocated, it has been proposed for allocation within the Council's draft local plan, which went out to consultation in 2020 and has remained to be proposed for inclusion within the revised growth strategy. The smaller plan on the above slide is the plan of the site, which was included within the proposed site allocations in the draft local plan. The application red line site plan is essentially the same, with the addition of the inclusion of the access road to the south of the site. However, the local plan update is still at a fairly early stage of preparation and therefore currently has a limited weight in the decision-making process, and therefore the planning status of the site at present remains unallocated. However, as the Council cannot currently demonstrate a 5-year housing land supply, the application is being brought forward for determination against the NPPF application of the tilted balance, which requires a presumption in favour of sustainable development unless any adverse impacts would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits. However, as noted in the report, the reason for the lack of a 5-year housing land supply is due to over-delivery rather than under-delivery, and therefore the tilted balance should be tempered. Existing access into the site is taken from Bridge Farm Road, located off the Wargrave Road at the southern end of the site, as well as off a track known as Muddler's Lane, accessed from the A4 at the north end of the site. The above slide shows the location of the site in relation to some of the local services and facilities within Twyford, along with approximate travel times from the site on foot or cycle. As can be seen, there are a range of services and facilities that would be within walking or cycling distance from the site, including Twyford train station, local schools and other shops and amenities. Being sited adjacent to a major development location, the site is therefore considered to be sustainably located. Turning to the proposals, with the exception of access, this is an outline application seeking to establish the principle of development on the site. As referred to in the accompanying report, parts of the site are located within flood zones 2 and 3, and therefore a sequential approach has been used to determine an illustrative land use plan. As indicated above, this shows that all proposed development would sit outside of the higher risk flood areas within the beige shaded areas, and this includes a provision for climate change. The Environment Agency raised no objection to the proposals on this basis. As mentioned, the application seeks full planning approval for access into the site, which is proposed to be taken from the A4 at the north end of the site. The proposals include a new roundabout to the west of the existing access and a secondary access to the east. The existing track access into the site would be for pedestrian and cycle access only, as would the existing track at the southern end of the site. A toucan crossing is also proposed on the A4, along with a 3-metre wide pedestrian cycle path to connect the site with the north side of the A4, which would be the route to the local Pigott secondary school. A speed reduction from 60 to 40 miles per hour is also proposed from the Charville roundabout to the Wargrave roundabout. The above design is considered acceptable and has taken on board comments raised through the Stage 1 road safety audit and will be subjected to further audits through the detailed design process. Moving back to within the site, as shown above and detailed further within the accompanying photo pack, areas shown flooding on the site are located within the flood risk zones 2 and 3, and all built development would sit outside of these areas. Surface water is proposed to be managed through sustainable drainage systems, further details of which would be required as part of the subsequent Reserve Matters application. The above slide shows an illustrative master plan submitted with the application, and whilst this is not proposed to be an approved plan should permission be forthcoming, it gives an illustrative indication of what the layout of the site might look like. This indicates a number of perimeter blocks of housing which would be predominantly positioned on the east and north sides of the site and outside of the flood zones 2 and 3. However, this would be further detailed and assessed as part of the Reserve Matters submission. All of the affordable housing, which would be a 40% provision, would be provided on site, which is considered to be a key benefit. As already mentioned, access to and from the site at the southern end onto Wargrave Road would be limited to pedestrians and cyclists. Areas on the west and southern side of the site situated within flood zones 2 and 3 would form parts of the proposed public open space. This area is proposed to be designed to be a riverside park with wetland features and planting appropriate to its riverside setting, which will also serve to enhance biodiversity and would not only serve the residents of the development, but the wider public also. Adjacent to the riverside park would be a children's play area. An illustrative story height plan also accompanies the application, which indicates that the prevailing height of development across the site would be up to 2 stories, with some areas providing up to 2.5. Whilst this is considered acceptable in principle, this would require further scrutiny at the Reserve Matters stage. The arboricultural impact plan above shows that with the exception of trees that would be required for removal to accommodate the new accesses, the majority of existing trees within and around the site could be retained as part of the proposals, and significant additional planting would be incorporated throughout the development in connection with the proposals. Again, as this is an outline application, this would be detailed through the Reserve Matters and conditions details. In summary, and as stated in the report, the proposals are considered to represent a sustainable development located adjacent to the major development location of Twyford. In accordance with the application of the NPPF tilted balance, there are not considered to be any identified adverse impacts associated with the proposals that would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of bringing forward this housing development, including 40% affordable housing, to contribute towards the Council's housing delivery targets. Bringing forward development on sites which are considered to be sustainably located, as the case is here, will help the Council's position in relation to resisting speculative applications on less sustainable sites. Officers are therefore recommending the application for approval, subject to the conditions listed and the completion of an accompanying Section 106 agreement. I would like to draw your attention to the supplementary planning agenda, which highlights some minor changes to the wording of some of the conditions, as well as reference to a further objection received after the publication of the report. One further additional objection has been received, which again does not raise any new issues. I would also like to bring to your attention a discrepancy noted today within the air quality section to report, paragraphs 116 to 127. Whilst the air quality within the air quality management area is predicted to meet the annual objective for nitrogen dioxide of 40 micrograms per metre cubed at one location outside the AQMA, it is shown to be exceeded. However, the air quality report used 2019 model data derived from 29 actual data in order to provide a 2021 baseline. With officers having compared the predicted change with actual data from 2021, officers still consider that the air quality with development will be below the objective, both within and outside the air quality management area. We would, however, like to add a condition requiring an updated air quality assessment at the Reserve Matters stage, having regard to the number of dwellings and technical guidance current at that time. As such, a further condition is recommended for inclusion, which requires the applicant to submit an updated air quality assessment with the Reserve Matters. Thank you.
Okay. Sam. Sam's online, I'm assuming.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Oh,
Sam, it's not you yet, sorry. It's the agent first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you say, I'm the agent for the application. Before you this evening is a high quality and well considered proposal for development. We have worked hard with your officers and statutory consultees to ensure that the scheme complies with the council's standards and exceeds them wherever possible. I would like to draw your attention to what we consider to be the main benefits of the proposals. A new publicly accessible riverside park will be created, including green spaces, walking routes and a new play area. The provision of approximately 5 hectares of parkland alongside other forms of open space exceeds the council's standard requirements. Approximately 350 new trees will be planted. These will include new willow trees near the river, fruit trees within the new orchard, together with wildflower planting. These are in addition to bird and bat boxes alongside wooden paths to support vertebrates and other small species. The extensive habitats created will result in an overall biodiversity net gain of approximately 30%, alongside a 60% gain in hedgerows and a 15% gain in riverside biodiversity. This is a significant improvement that far exceeds the government's future policy requirement of 10%. To contribute to climate emergency objectives, all new homes will benefit from photovoltaic panels and will be highly thermally efficient. Alongside secure bike storage facilities, all of the properties will be served by electric vehicle charging points, again exceeding current policy requirements. By virtue of its location, the site is easily accessible to services in the centre of Twyford and the railway station, and is consistent with the concept of a 15-minute neighbourhood. The scheme has been designed to encourage cycle and pedestrian connectivity to the southeast via Walgrave Road, in line with the concepts in the emerging neighbourhood plan. A new Toucan crossing will be built along Bath Road to allow safe access to the north, and a detailed walking and cycling strategy will identify further enhancements. The 200 new homes will include 1 and 2 bedroom apartments and 2 and 3 and 4 bedroom semi-detached family homes. The housing mix will be in accordance with that sought by the housing officer and the local housing needs assessment. The intention here is to create a mixed community weighted towards smaller homes, not large executive properties. 40% of the new homes, that's 80 dwellings from 200, will be affordable in full compliance with the council's policies. This will include first homes, social rented and shared ownership properties. There's no ifs or buts about that. This is a greenfield site at Twyford. It's perfectly viable to provide that level of affordable housing. We'll just add that Crowdace are a family-owned house builder and they wish to deliver these homes quickly. To demonstrate this commitment, Crowdace has volunteered to a significantly reduced period, 18 months, within which they will submit subsequent reserve matters approval for approval by the council, and they'll probably submit them much quicker than that. Therefore, and should members be minded to approve the application, the committee can be confident that the development will be implemented in a timely manner, and this will be achieved on a site which is proposed for allocation and which will significantly benefit the council's housing supply. Thank you.
Okay, Sam now. Sam Akhtar.
thank you very much. It's Councillor Slam Akhtar here, the Borough Council for Charville. Just wanted to say, yeah, in regards to this, I think 200 dwellings is just way too much for this area to take. I have real issues with the access to the site as well from the A4, which by the roundabout, which is very, very close to the current A321 and A4. The A4 is an extremely busy road, as you all know, and this development will only add traffic, congestion, noise pollution, which at peak times is already oversubscribed, especially with the new Elizabeth line currently in place. Part of this site is also on a floodplain, and I'd like to see this site retained for the conservation and protection of wildlife. And whilst not directly a planning issue, local school places are already massively oversubscribed in the area, and I feel that this number of new dwellings would only just make this problem a lot worse. Thank you.
And Stephen as a ward member.
And thank you very much, Chair. And I'd like to start by thanking Sophie for her report, which is very, very balanced, and also to thank her for answering the many queries I've fired at her over many, many months since this application was first submitted. First point to note with this, and it is, I think, an important point for all committee members to be aware of, this is an outline relating to access only, but if the committee were to approve it, it would be giving, in principle, permission to development along the lines suggested in this application. It would be giving permission on the understanding that it could accommodate 200 houses and that in principle that was acceptable. So I think it's legitimate for us to consider other matters besides access this evening, because the access is really the means of delivering the scheme. I want to start, if I may, I'm going to start with some observations and then I'm going to make some proposals based on the report and what I've heard this evening. The first point really relates to the principle of development. And here there's really clearly arguments on both sides. I took it that the key point in Sophie's report was that she believes in our current circumstances, with no 5-year land supply since last year, the tilted balance, as it's called, comes into play. And that means that the application should be approved unless it can be shown that the adverse impacts outweigh the benefits. So, there are arguments that I could go into, but I would try not to delay things too much by going into CP1 and CP11, which are our own policies, which this application is not in compliance with. But that tilted balance clearly is a factor. It is tempered, as Sophie said, by the fact that we have very legitimate reasons for not having a 5-year land supply, reasons that are very particular to Wokingham. But we have that situation to contend with, and therefore we really now have to consider what are the adverse impacts of this application that might outweigh the benefits. And my first point, and trying to be as even-handed as I can on this, is to say that there is a benefit to this scheme that can't be denied, and that's the promise of provision of 40% affordable housing. There is a need for such housing to help those priced out of the market, both in Twyford and across the borough. But before I would be able to consider this as a clear benefit, I would have to be confident that what is promised now will be delivered when it comes to a subsequent reserved matters application. We've heard the assurances given by the agent, which I welcome, but I'm sure he'll understand in the context of the discussion we had, a very long discussion we had earlier this evening, that developers do not always deliver what they promise. So in relation to what I would say were the adverse impacts, these have been clearly stated in the submissions from, it's now 239 objectors amongst local residents, Twyford, Charville and Wargrave parish councils, and councillors Lindsay Ferris for Twyford and councillor Sam Akhtar, who we've heard from this evening from Charville. Now, these concerns, I think it's fair to say, are exacerbated in the minds of many people by anxiety about the cumulative effect of development along the A4 corridor, this section of the A4 corridor. And although we can't take those other applications that are in the pipeline or are in the draft local plan into account this evening, that undoubtedly is preying on the minds of many people, the thought that there could be other substantial development very close to this site. Now, in relation to this site, the principal concerns can be summarised, I think, as these three factors. First, traffic and associated air quality problems. Second, flooding on-site and off-site. Much discussion was had earlier on about the way in which there'd be no development in the floodplain. I completely accept that. but it's displacement of water that we have to worry about and the effect it will have elsewhere. And this must be a particular worry for residents in Charleville who are downstream on the Loddon. And the third factor is the ability of the local infrastructure to cope, and especially concerns about the capacity of the Pigott Senior School and the impact of those further away from the school, but who are still in the catchment area. Now, to pursue these concerns to a refusal at this stage, I think would be really quite difficult. And that's simply because the expert testimony we have regarding all of these different points suggests that in the view of the experts, they're acceptable. Sadly, I can't bring forward equally valid testimony to suggest they're not. The council's highways team, its drainage officer, and its children's services officers, as well as the Environment Agency, which is the statutory consultee on flood risk, have all given the application the green light. And that puts us in a really quite tricky position, or puts me in a tricky position, certainly. But I think there are good reasons to defer this application, to seek further information before the committee makes a decision, because I think there are quite a number of issues that remain to be resolved. And for the reasons I've already said in relation to this being an outline, but if we agree it, we're agreeing to the principle of development and we're tied in to eventually agreeing development on this side. I think it's important to get these points clarified now and not wait to reserve matter stage. So let me just give you, in summary, what the reasons for deferral might be. The first is that we need to seek an improvement in pedestrian and cycle access to the Pigott School. And I would need a lot of reassurance that what's being proposed is actually going to deliver the necessary level of safety. There's a pinch point on the railway bridge on the A4 that narrows the footpath and cycle lane. It narrows it to 1.5 metres. This needs to be widened to meet national standards. LTN 120 recommends a 4-metre wide pathway to accommodate cycle and pedestrians. This is only 1.5 metres. I also note that the proposed new footway along the south of the A4 to get to the Pelican Crossing is proposed to be only 3 metres. Now, that was acceptable in the past, and we have examples of 3-metre wide in the borough, but that was because guidance in the past accepted 3 metres. Guidance now proposes 4 metres. I think we should at the very least be asking to see whether 4 metres can be achieved on that southern footway, but also and cycleway, but also that the applicants undertake work to see how they can achieve a 4-metre wide pathway where the bridge currently narrows that pathway to 1.5. So that's my first and I think in many ways most substantial reason for wanting a deferral. But as we are asking, as I'm asking for a deferral, I would like to throw in other things that I think need to be properly considered. I would like to see further details from the highways team about the modelling they've done of traffic movements. And may I also ask a quick question while I'm on my way, so to speak. On page 215, we're given data on the distance in metres and walking time and cycle times to local facilities. Could I ask what the measuring point is for that? Is it the south of the site? Is it the southern entrance to the site, or is it the north of the site? I suspect it's the south of the site.
think
where
I
the
can-
pedestrian and cycling access would be.
Do you want me to answer that now?
Yeah, that would be
I
helpful.
believe it's from the middle point of the site, because
Okay.
I checked the distance to Twyford and it tied in with that. So I
Okay.
think from the north end of the site, you're probably looking at another 400 metres approximately.
Yeah, okay. That's very helpful. Thank you. That clarifies that anyway. But I'd be grateful for further information from the highways team about the modelling that they've done of traffic movements. My fear is that the assumption made in the modelling seems to be that most residents living on the site who want to use the station, Twyford Station, will walk or cycle there. I think that might be overly optimistic, especially for people living on the north of the site. My belief is that many people living in the north of the site, and particularly on wet days, will actually be driven to the station by other members of their family or household, and they'll be collected there in the evening. Now, if that were the case, it would generate 4 journeys through the already congested crossroads for every rail commuter driven to and from the station. There and back by the driver, there and back to collect. So I am concerned about that. I'm also concerned that many drivers will approach the crossroads from either the Wargrave Road or via Charville and the High Street. Both of these arms of the crossroads are already heavily congested. I have to say, last week I waited 25 minutes to get through the crossroads from the Wargrave Road. 25 minutes. Just imagine what extra 200 houses might do to that. If they don't go down Wargrave Road, they'll go down High Street via Charville. And High Street is one of the most polluted areas in the borough, as the canyon effect of the buildings close to the road traps the pollution. So I'd like to see and interrogate the detailed modelling of traffic flows before the committee makes the decision. And while we're at it, I'd like to see details of the proposed developer contribution to air quality improvement, and to pick up that point that Sophie raised in the supplementary to the update, which was about up-to-date air quality monitoring data. We're working at the moment on projections from a 2019 base. And it seems to me we need more up-to-date data. You were suggesting that might be built in as a condition to be delivered at the time of the Reserved Matters application. I would like to see it now, because I think it's an in-principle question that we need to resolve at this stage. I'm not too far to go, promise, but I've got a couple more points to make. The other one picks up on a point that Sam raised in relation to school places. I'd like to ask the council's schools team to give us data on projected pupil numbers over the next 5 to 10 years. That, it seems to me, to be the likely period when the site's going to be generating additional demand at the Piggott Senior School. And families across Twyford are understandably worried that this application, if it's approved, will reduce their chances of getting into the Piggott School. And that's going to be especially the case if they live to the south of the village. I have to say, the schools team's optimistic assessment of the current situation is at odds with what I've been told about local schools. In fact, schools across the borough are at or very close to capacity. We have a capacity problem right now. And looking to the future, I would like assurances that this development would not cause problems for people in the existing catchment area and lead to its shrinkage. Wayne will remember a couple of years ago, he and I met with Children's Services to discuss this problem. It was a serious problem for families in South Twyford. A development this close to the school would potentially push all of those families out of the catchment. So I'd like some projections from the schools team. And finally, I'd like to see details from the applicant of how pedestrian and cycle access to the south of the site is to be made compatible with vehicular access to the Cedar Park Nursery over what is actually a single track railway bridge. It's a one-way single track railway bridge, which will be taking cars coming in and out to deliver and collect children from Cedar Park Nursery. And there will be a conflict which would need to be managed at the very least with pedestrians and cyclists seeking to either come in or leave the site. So there is considerable scope for conflict there, and I would like to see how that might be managed or avoided before we make any decisions on the application. So those are my reasons for deferral. They're quite long. I'm quite happy to try and summarise them if it helps.
David?
Chair, thank you. I carefully position myself in the room to have at least one seat between myself and Councillor Conway, because at face value, there's quite a lot to like about this scheme. From the safe and neutral vantage of faraway Finch Hampstead, it's got a lot to recommend it. But when you dig into it, there are some serious issues as well. I take note, first of all, of the number of local objections. Having been elected to this council largely on the back of local objections to a plan, also in the local plan update, it would be somewhat hypocritical to then sweep aside objections in another part of the borough. And so those 239 people do have a voice that has to be taken into account. Can I just start, Sophie, by asking you one direct question? Have you read the emerging Twyford neighbourhood plan?
I haven't read it in detail, but I have looked at it. I'm not wholly familiar with it.
I asked that because there are clauses in the neighbourhood plan that relate to this, and they're not referred to anywhere in the documents we've got, other than a comment that says the neighbourhood plan carries little weight at this stage. That's not strictly true in terms of what the MPPF says, because as it's now past the Regulation 18 consultation, it carries a little more weight, not full weight clearly, but it does carry weight, and that perhaps should be recognised in this, and that in itself might be a reason for further deferral so that gets considered. But the key point to me is about the question of, is this premature? There are two other potential developments being looked at as part of the review of the local plan update, which would impact upon Twyford. One at Ashridge Farm and one that's known locally as Twyford Gardens. Both of these would have a large amount of traffic coming into Twyford from one route or another. And I say they're relevant because when you talk about prematurity in the making of the future plan, if either of those went ahead, the public acceptance, if either of those were recommended for going ahead by the team working on the local plan update, public perception would be heavily prejudiced if this application had gone through and been accepted in advance. The National Planning Policy Framework does allow for prematurity to be considered. It says actually in clause 50 about decision making, although planning permission on grounds of prematurity will seldom be justified where a draft plan is yet to be submitted for examination. In the case of a neighbourhood plan, before the end of the local planning authority publicity period. Now that has passed, the neighbourhood plan has passed the local authority publicity period. So actually prematurity can be brought into consideration. And where planning permission is refused on grounds of prematurity, the local planning authority will need to indicate clearly how granting permission for the development concerned would prejudice the outcome of the plan making process. Well, in my opinion, granting permission for 200 houses in this site will prejudice the outcome of the review of the whole local plan when two of the major sites under consideration would affect Twyford. So for those reasons, plus the fact that we haven't really given due weight to the neighbourhood plan in the report here, I also would support this be deferred.
Andrew, next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sophie, for your presentation, and thank you, Mr. Roberts, for outlining numerous commendable features of the proposed development, and thank you, Sam, for raising a number of very pertinent concerns. Stephen has outlined a number of areas in which he believes it's important that we seek further information. I agree with that. And I listed 6 separate areas, in which further information, I believe, would greatly assist in our decision. And for that reason, I would support a deferral of this application. I would like the committee also to consider adding 2 further areas in which further information could be helpful, and that is further information about any potential contribution to off-site flooding, and following up David's point, some more information about the relationship of the Twyford neighbourhood plan to this planning application. So that would make 8 areas, in which I think further information could be very very helpful. But I would support a vote to defer this application. Chris,
the officer has some information.
Yeah, I mean, the plan at the moment does have limited weight. I think Sophie has referred to that in her report. Essentially, we have to balance the neighbourhood plan and all the other policies against where we are in our position with housing and land supply. So I think in terms of it, Sophie has considered it, but I think that's all we can say. It's limited weight we can give to that, and we have to balance it against the other policies. I'm not sure if one of my policy colleagues are online who probably know a little bit more about the neighbourhood plan than me. Ian Church might be able to jump in.
Hello, yes, just to provide perhaps a little bit more detail on the neighbourhood planning aspect. As I'm conscious, Councillor Cornish will know in much detail regarding the Finchampstead neighbourhood plan. Both Finchampstead and Twyford are both now at examination of their neighbourhood plans. But of course, until we have any outcome of that examination process from that independent examination process, it's very difficult to attach any weight to the policies contained within those neighbourhood plans, because they are still subject to that independent examination process, but also then subsequently will need to receive the report. And then if that does meet the basic conditions, it will then proceed to the referendum as other neighbourhood plans have done in the authority.
Okay, Andrew? John Kaiser?
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I'm a bit slow. I just got a number of questions that I'd like to ask the officers. We've already had a deferral, I know each, but do you believe there's any value in deferring this, because it would indicate that you hadn't considered all the relevant points? You are the experts, the highways people are the experts. We're asking for you to redo the job. Do you think a deferral adds any value to this process? That's my first question. The second question is, in the event that the applicant took this to appeal, in your view, is it likely that we could lose the appeal and also lose the conditions, which may also be the affordable homes? Could you answer those 2 for me?
Thanks, John. In terms of adding value, I think some of the questions Stephen has made, I have to say I don't think we can give you the answer tonight. In terms of things like school place projection, we don't have that because we don't have education colleagues here. Stephen is correct in saying the air quality data is not the most up to date, although we do believe it's probably going to improve with the later dates. And I think, as far as I'm aware, there's no information with regards to how achievable it is to increase the footpath along the A4. Especially with respect to the Network Rail Bridge, and probably further along, I think he said as well, at the other bridge. So to try and be in compliance with some of the standards that are coming. There is a condition on there. It really comes down to whether the committee are satisfied with conditions being adequate to give them the information they need to make a decision tonight. In terms of going to appeal, I think, John, you know my my standard answer on that in terms of the officer report is if it's pretty clear on our position as officers, our professional opinion, then I would say that going to appeal on a scheme in terms of going against the original officer recommendation is always a risk. That's probably all I can say on that. Is that enough, John?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that we have a scheme here which, for one reason or another, you've brought forward, and now you're saying to us, well, we really haven't considered the school, we really haven't considered this, we really haven't. Why is it in front of the planning committee, Connor, if that's the case?
I think the answer is we have considered those issues. I think the questions that are being raised by Stephen are ones that justifiable, I have to say, in terms of looking at some of those issues, especially as a local ward member and knowing the site better than I do in particular. So I think it's, to me, it's more clarity than the fact that we haven't done our job correctly.
Okay, if we defer it, does it mean that the appellant can go to non-determination?
The agreed determination day is the end of December, so yes, they potentially could.
Okay, thank you.
Chris?
Thank you. I must say, I've never heard a discussion of a planning application in which 3 members have all raised perfectly legitimate questions and each said, we've got to defer the application. We have to do our job here. We need to put the questions to the officers, try to get answers and come to a conclusion. We can't defer everything every week. Okay? So I was very surprised at that the way it started off with 3 people all simply wanting deferrals just for questions. The number 200 is up to 200, I think, at the beginning. And all we're considering is access. And when I saw the 200, I was wondering, is that, if we approve this outline, does that mean that they can't build more than 200? Then I saw there was a condition to restrict it to 200, which is fine. But I don't see that it means they will build 200. It's surely up to 200. Is that correct?
Thanks, Chris. Yes, that's correct. So the description does state up to 200, and that's because it's an outline application. We don't have the detail in front of us at this stage to be able to fully assess the resulting reserve matters layout in terms of ensuring that we're satisfied that all the WBC standards will be met, garden distances, the design. So it might be 200, but it won't be more than 200, but it will depend on how many we feel the site can acceptably accommodate, taking into account all the other factors that we need to assess at the reserve matters stage.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. The access on the New Bath Road, I see most in the indicative layout, most of the housing is on the railway side, and yet the main entrance is on the other side, on the west side. That may be because of the nature of the A4. Is it the A4, the New Bath Road? At that point, it seems a bit odd to have the main roundabout entrance on the other side from where most of the housing is. Could you explain that?
Would the officer please?
I think I don't know whether Cameron might be able to jump in there. I mean, I think the discussions around the access are as a result of discussions with the highways officers in terms of where that would best be located. I don't know if the distance to the Wargrave roundabout has played a part, but I don't know if Cameron, are you able to say anything in that regard?
Thank you, sir, for giving me a chance here. Actually, most of the housing are taking access from the roundabout, and only 14 or 15 units are taking access from the T junction. So the roundabout has capacity has been checked, and the capacity is working fine. So most of the if we can say 150 or 160 units, they are accessing from the roundabout. So yeah, the principal movement is from the roundabout. The principal access is roundabout.
Okay, thank you. Could I ask, is school capacity a planning matter?
Sorry, Chris, was that is
the capacity ability
planning?
To take in pupils to schools, the capacity of the schools, is that a planning matter? Should we be considering that?
I believe it would be, yes, and we have consulted with our education team. They've acknowledged that there has been an issue across the borough with regards to secondary school places, and I think the committee might remember earlier this year there were 3 applications brought before you with regards to temporary provisions to expand capacity in, I think, 3 schools, including the Pigott. What we're being advised at the moment is that this year, the Pigott was able to offer a place to all pupils whose parents had applied within catchment, with additional places outside of catchment. And also they've noted that within the primary schools, the local primary school, there is sufficient capacity at the moment. So there is actually space. So their view is actually this development would, at this point in time, help to fill those spaces. And as they travel through the school, the existing bulge will have passed through the secondary school, and therefore they don't raise an objection to the application on that basis.
Wayne?
I'll come back to schools because I really don't agree with what they've said. I mean, Stephen's already said that we went through a very difficult process a couple of years ago, and then part of that process, Pigott agreed to take more pupils, but there was a massive paycheck attached to that in terms of what we had to find as a council to make that happen. And the projections we had at the time, I didn't see anything coming off the in terms of numbers for a long time. And as Stephen's quite rightly said, this school is in spitting distance of Pigott School. Pigott School. You've got Charville people getting a pass through because of the primary there being part of the Pigott School, but what you will do is you will create a massive problem for the other parts of Twyford. So this will take all the influx unless the catchment stays the same, but the school is then going to have to increase yet again. And is that site big enough for that? Well, it might be if you take away all their sports facilities, but it certainly wouldn't be big enough to do it. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with Stephen. I think we've missed a very important part of democracy on this. This was part of the local plan twice over. Second time over, we had, if you keep out the neutrals, we had 396 people respond, and it was a 60-40. So not a 48-52, it was a 60-40. The words were disagree. So if you firmly disagree or you just somewhat disagree. So 60 people disagreed with the site, but we haven't actually gone back to the people of Twyford with the results of that survey and said, this is what was said. This is the results of the consultation that went out last November. The neighbourhood plan, the neighbourhood planning document that I've read don't actually go against this site. They actually say one of their things they talk about is the 25% affordable housing for first time homeowners. So, and in here it's 25%. So that confers. And I was going to say, I didn't think they were at odds with this site. They recognised that it was in the local plan. But I go back to my prematurity point that you've made, David, that this site, in my view, we're only seeing this here today is because of our situation with the 5-year land supply, which is difficult. And I understand all this business about tilted balance, etc. And it just seems to me that this borough is now being completely hammered for over delivering housing for the last, since 2017, and now we're getting the rough of it. So on that basis, and if by deferring it, we could almost have a consultation with residents to go back out on all these points picked up, so we could assure them of all the issues. I know that there's issues, and I've seen it all over Facebook, so has Stephen, that I would support Stephen.
Would you like to have? Okay, actually.
I'd just pick up a point that was raised earlier, that if we do defer this, I just know what's happened locally. Something going to appeal for non-determination. You'd be even in a worst case scenario. So if this goes to, if we don't make a decision tonight and we defer this, which is what you want to do, they appeal on non-determination because we haven't made a decision by the end of this month, and you then lose the appeal. This happens anyway. Because I'm just talking from personal experience today, actually.
David?
Sorry, yeah, so clearly any deferral, there's a risk of appeal. The applicant who's sitting over there essentially has to balance up the costs associated with appeal and the risks associated with appeal against, is it worth waiting for that information to be clarified to yourselves? And if that's likely to sway you in a decision that they want as per the officer report. So there is a risk, absolutely. And I think given our housing land supply, that is obviously a larger risk than it used to be. But yeah, I think that's something you need to consider in anything you're doing tonight.
David?
Thank you. Yeah, Rebecca makes a great point, and I'd be nervous of that as well. But the applicant has been here this evening and telling us that he wants to be a willing partner of the borough. So we can see whether he's as good as his word or not. I come back to agreeing with each other here. To me, I'd like to hold back on this until we know have a little bit more clarity on where the local plan update is going, which I'd hope we have certainly into the first months of next year. It's about 2 sites which will directly impact on Twyford in terms of traffic coming through and on the crossroads in the centre, and that to me would have a material impact. If those sites weren't up for options, this has got a lot to recommend it, and I may come to a different decision on the evening. We also do have to take account, I know you officers don't, but we do have to take account of public opinion and what the locals say and how they respond to consultations. And I don't put that aside lightly.
I think 2 points. Future applications we cannot take into account in the planning process, and obviously there is a lot of public opposition locally to this. However, Sophie has considered those points against our policies and has adopted standards, and I think our report is pretty clear that it is considered, the points are considered, and at the end of that process, when you look at everything and balance it together, she still feels it's acceptable.
Can I just come straight back on that, Conrad? I really don't like to argue with someone who's much more expert than I am, but I'm looking at policy 50 or paragraph 50 of the NPPF, which talks about refusal of planning permission on grounds for prematurity of the local plan. So in some cases, we can take into consideration the wider picture. Not all the time, I grant you, but I think in this instance, at least, it has some relevance.
I think that the problem is there's no certainty of when the local plan is going to be adopted. It hasn't gone through the next stage, so we're a little bit premature in thinking that. But yeah, prematurity is not an argument you really want to have. It's not something the inspectors will essentially listen to.
Okay, John Kaiser.
Thank you. I'm a bit slow tonight. Yeah, I mean that's very interesting. But what we've just heard, the problem is if you're making assumptions of the fact that there may be something in the local plan which may affect whether or not you approve this development, that would be fine and dandy if we were 5 minutes away from a local plan, but we're not. We are months and months and months away from the local plan. And the problem that we're faced with this is that if we have this popping up all over the place at lots of other developments across the borough, we will find ourselves in exactly the same position. Now, I'm very concerned that the officers have brought this application forward, and listening to Stephen talk about it for 20 minutes would indicate to me that has not been the due diligence done on this planning application, and that's of a major concern to me. And I would agree with Chris that we've deferred one already tonight because there was information missing. We're now going to be deferring another one because the information is missing. The more developments and more applications that we defer, the more likely we're going to get more applications which are going to be unsustainable. They're going to be in areas which are undefendable, and I'm just very concerned that we just don't kick this down the road, find ourselves in a position where next week we're looking at another 2 or 3 applications somewhere else in the borough where it is truly unsustainable, which there was no recommendation in the local plan update with regards to a possible site. And I would just say this, chaps, and this is a fact of life, 97% of all the houses that have been built in this borough has been built in the south of the borough. That needs to be noted here tonight.
It definitely is noted that 95% were built in the south of the A through 29M and only 5% built north of the A through 29M.
With all due respect, that's totally irrelevant to our consideration of this application.
I would agree with you, Stephen, but it's not irrelevant when you start talking about opinion of residents. We all have residents.
I'm talking about the planning application before us, and that's what I'm limiting my comments to. And at no point, I'm afraid I don't endorse your view, John, that the fact that I've raised a number of points which I think need to be further considered and can be done so through a deferral. In no way do I construe that as a criticism of the officers. Far from it. I think it's quite legitimate that these points be raised. Some of them, I suspect, no one has really thought much about, but that's part of a process. That's why we have a planning committee. That's one of our roles. And to come back to Chris's comment that why are we deferring? We should make a decision. Well, it is our role to seek information before we can make an informed decision. And I see no problem in deferring. Just because we've deferred one application this evening does not mean we can't defer this one. I would like to correct David's point about the other sites. When I alluded to other sites on the A4 corridor, I was not alluding to those sites. I was alluding to sites in Charville and other speculative application sites that are in the pipeline, not to major development sites elsewhere, or potential major development sites, or ones put forward by developers as major development sites elsewhere. And finally, to come to Rebecca's very important point about non-determination, you're absolutely right, of course, Rebecca. There is an element of risk. I would hope that the applicant, in good faith, would recognise that we're seeking information to enable us to make a sound planning decision, and that they would work with us to do that. If they choose to go to appeal for non-determination, that is, of course, their right, and they can do so. And we will have to make a decision as a committee then, very quickly, about what we would like to argue at that appeal. But I have to say, this is not an open and shut case. Sophie gave a very thorough analysis of the matters relating to the principal development on this site. There are arguments on both sides that can be deployed. Even the tilted balance argument, as she pointed out, can be tempered in our case by special sets of circumstances. So I don't think we should be bulldozed into making a decision if we're not comfortable that we have all the information required, just because there is the threat of an appeal for non-determination. So I would like to persist with my proposal. Oh, I thought we'd actually got to the end. No, all right.
Wayne?
Yeah, I mean, just for clarity, I wasn't suggesting that bringing in the other sites that was referred to would be an impact on this. I was just referring to the fact that this was in the local plan twice, We haven't had an update. Residents haven't had seen the next phase of that. I understand what you're saying, David. There might be other sites coming forward, but that would then mean we're into another Regulation 18, and just work through the timelines of that. Then we won't have a local plan till 2025. So we're going to be floating. Well, we'll have a lot more of these come into the planning committee. I still go back to this point, and there's other things that were in the local plan, including, you know, the gentleman said solar panels, which yes, 10-15% above neutral, just what you get. Well, is what we were proposing, or what I was proposing in our last update, was zero carbon homes. So that's another little goodie that we lose on this application. And I think that the killer here for the individuals that represent the crowd ace will be time, because it goes to Rebecca's point, non-determination. If you're going to ask these guys to wait for 18 months, 2 years, then, you know, I think we know the answer.
Okay, John, and then that's the final, and then Stephen.
Yeah, I really, Wayne asked the question because one of the questions I would ask would be, how long do you think we ought to defer this for? I mean, say, because if I was the developer, I would want a timetable.
I think, John, I suppose part of the conversation that we'll have to have if it gets deferred tonight with the developers after this is how long the information that we're talking about will take them to produce, essentially, because a lot of it's them. I think there's just elements of clarity from our side, which shouldn't take too long. But yeah, it's hard to. I mean, it will come back to committee when the information's available, if that's the approach we're taking here.
Yeah, but surely, being realistic, Connor, I mean, say they're not going to just let you have, well, they may do if they're really nice people, but they would, I'm sure that they must have plans made that they would expect to fulfill in a period of time.
Well, we could ask them if we want to, but I'm not sure that's proper. Stephen?
I have actually put forward some reasons for deferral, which I will happily read out again so that there's clarity for all concerned. As Connor's quite rightly said, some of these points are asking for clarification from within the council, but these should be relatively straightforward points. Others are asking for information from the developer, which may take more time for them to provide. The first one is really seeking improvement in pedestrian access to the Pigott School, and in particular trying to address the problem that the pinch points on the railway bridge, or the pinch point on the railway bridge, deters walking and cycling. It's currently only 1.5 metres wide. It needs ideally to be widened to the national recommended standard of 4 metres in LTN 120. And equally, the proposed southern footway along the A4 to get to the Pelican crossing, which would enable you to get to the north side and then go over the railway bridge, that is currently proposed to be only 3 metres, whereas current guidance suggests 4. So we would be asking the applicant to see whether it's possible to achieve 4 metres at both of those points. We'd also be asking the schools team to provide data over the next 5 to 10 years. My argument really is knowing the situation now is not really relevant, because if planning permission were granted, full planning permission were granted tonight, and we've only got an outline in front of us, if full planning permission were granted tonight, it would take at least 3 years before any houses were occupied, quite possibly 5. So we need to know projections over the next 5 to 10 years of the ability of the Pigott School to accommodate additional pupils without shrinking the catchment area. On the highways point, I would be grateful for details on the modelling of traffic movements along the A4 in both directions, turning right out at the site and then right again down Walgrave Road, and turning left out of the site and going left again at the Charville roundabout, and then approaching Twyford Crossroads on High Street. I would be grateful if the applicants could provide details of the form of contribution they're proposing to make to air quality improvement, and related to that, get an update on air quality monitoring figures rather than using the 2019 base, getting some updated figures so that we can be confident about air quality in what is the most polluted area of one of the most polluted areas of the borough. And then finally, and again, I think this is for the applicant to provide us with information on how they propose to manage the potential conflict at the southern entrance to the site, which is designated for pedestrian and cycle access only, with vehicular traffic coming to and from the Cedar Park nursery over a single track footbridge or a single track railway bridge. And I think that's there was a suggestion from Andrew that we should get further information on off-site flooding. I'm slightly hesitant about that one because in that one we have, we may not like it, but the Environment Agency have raised no objection. So I'm not quite sure who we can turn to get a contrary view or a different view or information that we might like to know. It would only be the Environment Agency, and they've told us they think it's okay. So I'm afraid I fear we can't really push that one any further. So those are the 6 reasons I would propose that we defer the application.
The environmental officer wants to make a comment.
Thank you, Chair. It was just in relation to the air quality data. Since 2019, there has been some significant decreases in levels of nitrogen dioxide in the air quality management area. So the predicted traffic volumes for the up to 200 houses, with those predicted increases from this proposal, even multiplying those predicted vehicle movements in through the air quality management area would not bring those levels up to or to exceed the 40 milligrams per cubic metre, which is the National Air Quality Objective levels. So I think the additional data that could be provided to enhance or update the data already provided would just reiterate the fact that there has been a significant decrease, and that there is a buffer before before the levels would get anywhere near the 40 micrograms air quality limit. Thank you.
Can I just clarify that point a minute? When you said it's fallen since 2019, that presumably is because in 2020 there wasn't very much traffic at all. We had a little minor thing called COVID, and lockdowns, which meant the amount of traffic flowing was much reduced, at least for a while. So in 2020 it would certainly have fallen, and probably 2021, but I suppose the 2022 data may start to tell us whether it's starting to pick up again and whether that's having an impact.
Yeah, there has. That's correct. That's what the data shows, is that there was an increase from 2020 to 2021, but those levels are in fact significantly below the 40 microgram limit. So hence my reference to that. There's a plenty of capacity there, and looking at the developers' predicted increases to 2026, there could be a multiple increase in their projected vehicle movements through the town before the predicted levels would get anywhere near the 40 micrograms. So we don't have any concerns regarding air quality, the air quality management area being impacted adversely, or areas next to it.
Okay, on that basis, I think I should withdraw that reason for deferral, and I'll stick to the five.
Do you want to put a proposal to defer it on those five?
Brian has written out to us with regards to my other little chestnut with regards to energy efficiency of properties. And as there are 40% of houses that are being proposed as affordable, Crowdace being a family-run business and hopefully a sustainable business, I think one of the conditions or one of the areas that we should ask more information on, if they are small, why can't we have those zero carbon? Because to get smaller properties to a zero carbon level via air source, if you're already putting solar panels on air source, make sure the fabric's right. Obviously, all the other things around LED, I think you could possibly get to a point where you're at zero carbon, and that gives a sustainability in that 40%.
I don't think we can actually ask them if they can do that right now. Or you're asking to put that into the deferral?
Yeah, into the deferral, yeah.
I'm happy for that now to become the sixth reason for deferral, information on how they could achieve zero carbon homes.
Okay, there is a proposal for deferral. Okay. It's been seconded. Please vote in favor of the deferral. That's unanimously deferred to the next meeting.
That wasn't what the condition of deferral was. It can't be the next meeting. It will be as long as it takes for the applicants to provide that information.
Maybe they can do it quickly. Yes, going to the next one. At this point, we're falling asleep. Okay. Okay, to the land, the land to the rear of 5 to 7 Mayfields, application 22590, item number 60. And Jeff, you're going to be speaking about this. I'm assuming you're still there. Okay, officer presentation first. Quickly. 7 8 days. Let's get into it. Right, that's all.
Thank you, Chair. I will attempt to be brief here. The application relates to a variation of an original approval for 3 dwellings. Enforcement have been involved and they have established that the landscaping and parking hasn't been implemented in its current, in its improved form. They also haven't implemented the bin storage or the cycle storage. This application seeks to vary conditions to allow no bin storage, no cycle storage, and a revised landscaping scheme to accommodate parking. So that's the approved site plan, and this is the proposed site plan. This is the approved landscaping plan, and this is the proposed as-built landscaping plan. It involves additional landscaping within, as negotiated with the applicant. I should note the plan in the officer report is the as-built plan, which is incorrect. sorry, the plan within the report, but the plan attached to the report as an appendices is the correct plan. So there's a net reduction in landscaping, but it is achieving a satisfactory outcome for a Blackland development. There are 5 objections, 3 of which from the subject property. They're broadly in accordance with the concerns about character and loss of landscape and loss of cycle storage. I could go further, but I would leave it to questions if they come up. Thanks.
Councillor Jeff Harper.
Good evening. My name is Councillor Jeff Harper from Winners Parish Council. I sit on a parish planning and transportation subcommittee. The subcommittee met recently and discussed this planning application and heard the views of local residents who attended the meeting and are affected by the outstanding issues. The planning permission, as it stands, sets out conditions that the developer must have completed before, and I emphasise before, the first occupation, which according to the residents was in October 2017. The developer has failed to comply with this, and following extensive delays and promises, eventually constructed a layout different from that which had been approved, and had ignored the efforts of the residents, right, to resolve them. The members of the subcommittee felt that the developer had had plenty of time to correct the outstanding issues and introduce the original plans and conditions that were approved to meet certain core policies. The subcommittee were unanimous in their objection to this planning application and felt that the developer should be held to the original planning application and conditions, and this should be enforced. We were disappointed in the Borough Officer's recommendation to approve this application, as it was felt that the officers had not fully taken into account the effect on the residents nor the Parish Council objections, and strongly request that this application be rejected. Thank you.
Mr. Rhodes, would you like to speak now?
Certainly. I will quickly go through some of the points. 16, car parking. There are 3 spaces which say they're unallocated. They are allocated 5, B and C according to the land registry. The driveways are a size of 4.4 metres. They should be 5 metres. If a 5-metre vehicle is parked outside 5C, it will overhang their driveway, their block paved walkway. Cars are currently parked opposite 5C and 5B on the flat landscaped garden, thus making it very difficult, if not impossible, for the drivers to leave 5B or C without a great deal of difficulty. The cycling under section 18, 19 and 20 show that it's totally inadequate. There's only one resident that is an owner-occupier at 5C, and therefore we believe that the existing cycle requirements are complied with, as there's only one resident who can be spoken to about this. The report actually says that there are sheds in the rear of 5A. That's very true, but they're only accessed by 5C. 27 talks to the net loss of landscaping. That is 40%. That's nearly half the landscaping has been scrapped for this development, leaving what was quite a nice and rather in keeping landscape to now a very unsightly border, which is made up of timber, which is already starting to fall apart. The planting which has been done, which took considerable time to enforce, 50% of the trees are now dead anyway. The biodiversity plan, which was submitted, has been totally ignored. Section 35, the Public Sector Equality Duty Act. Persons who have a disability to walk would find it very, very difficult to walk on the uneven gravel, and I would suspect somebody in a wheelchair would find it almost impossible to access the site. The site is still incomplete, gardens are not fenced, and the developer has chosen just to ignore every enforcement, which he should have taken over 5 years ago. Thank you very much for the time. I hope you'll listen to the concerns of the residents, which I am representing today.
And Prue, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. On behalf of the affected residents, I'm really very disappointed we're here this evening discussing this application to vary planning conditions 5 years after the conditions should have been complied with. And there are so many things left incomplete on the site. There were supposed to be bin stores. Now they're apparently unnecessary clutter. There were supposed to be cycle stores. They're not provided, and now the applicant wants them removed. At 6 metres, the garages are too short for bike storage. So highways are holding to the previous position that cycle stores are necessary, but there's still a proposal in front of you to change the condition so as to only make it a requirement to provide cycle stores if the current occupants of the dwellings say they want them. Why should the wishes of the current occupants override the policy position or the interests of future occupants, especially when, as we've just heard from Mr. Rhodes, some of them are rented and in fact one's unoccupied, I think, at the moment. There was supposed to be decent landscaping, not anymore. The area of landscaping is to be reduced by nearly a quarter, and to date, only 60% of what was supposed to be done has been provided, and worse, a good deal of the landscaping that has been put in has died, partly due to the fact the soil was not suitable for what was planted, and partly due to lack of maintenance. Adequate parking spaces were supposed to be provided. They have not been. The proposal now is to accept that 5 of the parking spaces will be substandard in length. This means that cars will stick out of them, including across the pedestrian access. There's supposed to be paving that has been replaced by gravel, which is an obstacle for pushchairs and wheelchairs. The gardens were supposed to be fenced. Only one of them has been. The dropped curb was not provided until this year. And then there's the sheds that Mr. Rhodes referred to and the biodiversity. I could go on. In summary, people have been living in these houses for the past 5 years, putting up with an unfinished development. They should have what they were promised. All this should have been done 5 years ago before the houses were occupied, according to the original planning permission. Yet the houses were allowed to be occupied without the conditions being complied with. The council should not be agreeing to something now simply because it's convenient for a developer who has ignored what he was supposed to do for the past 5 years. Please do not agree to vary these conditions.
Do we have some understanding as to why this has taken so long? You know, why we're 5 years down the line and the developer hasn't committed to the original plans and is now seeking a variation. So what has actually happened in these 5 years? Why are we at this now? Why hasn't this been addressed before with enforcement and basically?
The enforcement process does take a while. The officer report, page 260, does refer to 2 enforcement cases, one from 2020. We generally allow 28 days for some information to move forward, applications to be submitted. Often that does drag out. I wasn't the law enforcement officer for this case, but I can imagine there was issues between the owners and the occupiers and the developer at the time that has progressed to this stage now, where the council got involved in 2020, and then it's been 2 years since then to get to this stage as a planning application. Often developers like that will drag their feet in terms of getting to a stage where it's submitted.
Just for my understanding as well. So when this development was originally finished, was this not brought to the attention? How could residents been allowed to occupy this when there's the original planning kind of consideration? They haven't been met. So, for example, there is no bike store, there is no bin store. So, how does, just from my understanding, how has that been allowed to happen?
I guess that's the purpose of the council's enforcement department. So they follow up on a day-to-day basis those kind of breaches, and that's why they exist, I think. So the conditions are there to be complied with, and if they're not complied with, then enforcement will get involved.
Al?
Right. I mean, on the original planning application, a lot of very sort of useful conditions were applied. I can't see any reason why we should throw out all these and rewrite them. I think, you know, we should stick with the original conditions, and the developer should just implement them.
Enforcement.
Yeah, we've had discussions with the enforcement department about this. So they submitted the application. There are negotiations that occur in that process between enforcement officer and the owner or the developer at the time. So they need to take the decision about at what level it's expedient to pursue enforcement action to deliver what's approved. And that weighs up the cost to council and whether or not it's going to be successful at appeal. The application as submitted has been varied since then to include additional landscaping. And my recommendation does include the retention of the cycle storage condition. So in balance, there's the weighing balance of looking at whether or not it's expedient to pursue enforcement action based on those non-compliances.
My question is, why didn't enforcement do something about this a while ago? Did no one actually report that nothing was done and that the cycle stores and bin stores weren't done? Or was it just that the owners of the place didn't bother to inform anybody, or no one informed you, enforcement, that this was going on, or did they decide it was not expedient to do it?
I'd have to go through the history of when it was delivered. So the comment is that it was delivered in 2017. The enforcement case here is from 2020. So there is a 3-year period there or thereabouts where I just presume that there's been discussions between the developer and the people that bought the properties about delivering these unfulfilled obligations. And then it's eventually landed in the council's
inbox.
Yeah.
Could you give us the information for in writing? That's all.
I could spend 5 minutes looking through the email trail now.
Not now. Give it to us for next meeting. If you can give it to us in 5 minutes, that's fine. We'll go on in the discussion and you can come back to us. David?
Yeah, I think it was said earlier, conditions are there for a reason.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time this evening, and doubtlessly we'll do on other occasions, talking about conditions. And there's little point in saying this proposed in front of us really approve subject to conditions if we're really saying the conditions aren't going to be improved, aren't going to be enforced. I mean, it's sort of beyond my understanding, really.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you, David. I think the point with action, time periods, expediency, conditions is that the council's enforcement function, as it is elsewhere, is reactionary. It can only act upon breaches. That's why it's regularising you. We do not have the capacity, nowhere has the capacity to monitor the implementation of any scheme, hundreds of schemes at any one time across the borough, to make sure every single element of the scheme is provided. Only when it is brought to our attention can we act upon it. And if we act quickly and irrationally without justification, we come a cropper. So therefore, there is a due process to go through. Expediency is one part of that process, along with investigating what has not been complied with. Ultimately, what's in front of us is a proposal. Members, at their liberty, need to decide whether that is acceptable or not.
Wayne?
Can I just understand, Simon? These have been sold on the open market, have they? These properties?
Yes. So there's one owner and 2 renters.
But they have been sold, so the developer doesn't own them anymore.
There's a complicated land registry I won't go into it, but there is a complicated that involves other properties to the front of the site as well.
Because my point, that will explain what I'm about to say. This has happened on a lot of occasions. When I was the exec member looking after enforcement, and this would have been, didn't know about this site, but somebody buys a house. You buy a house, you see the plans, and you move into that house. Your obligation is with the person you bought that house from, right? The council is only there to help when they haven't met certain conditions. So what I can't understand here is why they haven't gone back through their channels, through their solicitors. Well, I probably know the answer. One probably has and the other two haven't because they're owned by the owner, I would imagine, a person who developed it. But I think that's probably where this chain has broken down and why enforcement haven't taken action earlier. Because think about it, you buy a house, it says it's got the garage, you turn up, hasn't got a garage, what do? You don't go to the council, you go to your solicitor and say, look, I bought a house with a garage, it hasn't got one, we need to sort this out, right? So, and this has happened a lot of times, and a lot of developers do it, especially on access roads. So I think what we've got in front of us is probably, and I don't know who lives in the first one, was it the gentleman talking this evening? I don't know, but we've now got a situation in front of us where they're trying to put this right, and we've got to agree whether we think it on balance, we should agree with it or say, no, you've got to stick with what you should have done in the first place.
David? Stephen?
Thank you. Well, you put it very well. We have to decide what we're going to do with this. I'm less concerned about the time taken, although I'm pleased that that's been explained. I'm more thinking about this question of expediency and just wanted to probe a little bit more about what that might mean in this particular context. It won't surprise you to know that the committee and every committee I've ever sat on connected with planning over many years take a dim view of two things. One is retrospective applications, and the other is variations, which effectively are like a retrospective application. And I suppose our instinctive reaction is to say, take a firm line, don't let them get away with it. So could you just take me through, Simon, what the argument for expediency is here in a bit more detail?
I guess I'm trying to explain my officer report in that sense. There's four aspects to it. There's the delivery of the waste collection point at the top of the street. That led to the first enforcement case. There is advice that has been delivered by the council advice that has been updated since the delivery of this property, or the approval of this property in 2014 has been updated to remove enclosed collection areas. It's better to have it bins collected on the curbside. For three houses in this development, that's an acceptable outcome. That's why that is considered, the deletion of that condition is acceptable. The cycle storage is, in my view, not acceptable to have that condition removed because of their family housing, and the cycle storage at the back of a garage is going to be at best accommodate one bike, and you wouldn't be able to get past a car down the side of the car. It ignores the fact that you've got children in the house that wouldn't be able to store their bikes. So that is the retention of that condition. The other two conditions relate to highways and landscaping, and they're effectively the same outcome because it relates to what's landscaped and it's accommodated at the front of the site. I've attempted to explain my reasoning for the parking arrangement. There is paving and there's gravel. In a sense, the paving doesn't delineate the space of the car space. You can have an overhang across the paving. I felt that was acceptable, and in achieving a balance in terms of landscaping within the backland site, there's policies there that we need to consider the character of the area and the delivery of landscaping. I considered the improvements that were made under this application from what's on the site at the moment was sufficient to be policy compliant. So those two, I guess, are the two main issues, the delivery of highways and landscaping. I felt that was acceptable.
John Kaiser, do you want to speak?
Yes, please. Having been through some fairly, what I thought were stone cold, we're going to win appeals around the Coombs and so on, finding that we find ourselves losing them. I mean, so my concern with all this is that we don't end up just rolling over when people haven't followed followed the conditions that they've made. That's really important. It's taken 5 years to get to this point. But I'm also minded that what we see when it goes to an inspection might not be what the inspector sees. And I mean, I assume that you've made the recommendation to approve the application on the basis that you feel that it's reasonable. Could you just confirm that?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Andrew?
Simon, am I correct in saying that you believe that the retention of the cycle storage was should be retained, that you're against suspending that condition?
I have amended the condition to suit the circumstances, but it is in effect retaining the condition to deliver cycle storage within a dedicated area outside of the garage. Yes.
Okay, I think I've understood that now. Okay, I do have concerns about the parking. Not fulfilling the conditions relating to the parking. Yeah.
What can actually be done about this if we turn this down? How can we force them to actually comply with the requirements that they agreed to with the planning application? And how can we get planning enforcement to actually do that?
I guess on the wishes of the planning committee, I guess we would be obliged to issue a notice to comply with the conditions outside of the normal process. The normal process would, if an application didn't come forward, the council would have to make a decision about whether it was expedient or not to enforce. But because the application's with the council, with the committee, and you've made or you intend to make a decision based on that, then we'd be obliged to follow and issue a notice, and that notice can then be appealed.
Go to a vote then, unless anybody else wants to speak. Whether we're approving this or turning it down and forcing enforcement to actually go to appeal. Is there a proposal? Is anyone prepared to propose to accept the officer's recommendation, or is there an alternate proposal? Is there a second? Wayne? All those in favor of approving the proposal? All those against? This has been refused. Any abstentions? Rebecca?
Chair, can we clarify the reasons for refusal?
They need to vote to refuse it first.
My apologies.
What do we need to do?
So then now next to that.
Okay, there needs to be an alternative proposal to refuse this. Okay, Al is proposing this, to refuse this.
Okay, I propose that the original condition should be enforced.
Is there a second? Is there a second? I'll second it, fine. Okay, all those in favor of Al's,
Sorry, can we just confirm from
Okay.
officers that that's an acceptable reason?
I don't believe it is. I can assist if you wish, because the officer report does go into a bit of detail. I think you would need to decide whether or not you refuse it on the waste storage collection point, which I believe would be contrary to our own developer advice that we give, or it's available on the website now. The cycle storage has already been conditioned to be kept in, so that's a reason for refusal, to say that inadequate cycle storage, contrary to policy, not supporting sustainable travel. And then the parking and the landscaping are kind of together, but the landscaping would be a policy departure of character of the area. Lack of back-end policy talks about delivering a good scheme that's suitable for the residents' landscape character. So that would be another reason. And the third reason, I guess, would be a combined parking, but it's difficult because there's no net change in the number of parking spaces. It might be the delivery of compliant spaces or turning spaces, but I would need to check that to be more accurate.
Stephen?
Would it also be possible to pick up on the point I think Drew Bray made about paving in the original application being replaced by gravel, and that being unsuitable for disabled access?
And prams.
It was discussed in the officer report in relation to an objector's concern. I don't think it turns on the surfacing, but I wouldn't be able to comment further than that. I'm sorry.
Just comply with rules for disabled access, British rules for disabled access into housing.
It would be a building regulations matter, disabled access.
Is it, if it's a building regulations matter, is there a building regulation requiring access for disabled people under the British Disability Act and things like this? It's not a planning rule, but
Not all the site is gravel. There are paving areas, so I'd suggest that there are areas alongside the parking spaces that are paved and then allows immediate access onto the site. So I don't think it's going to stop them accessing their dwellings. It may be impediment to visitors, but walking up the driveway maybe. But
Ezra Rhodes has got his hand up. Can we have him speak, please?
Yes, the site has very limited paved areas. Nobody could access any property without going across the gravel. The gravel is quite deep, and certainly a disabled person or a person in a wheelchair would not be able to get there. And I think it's the Public Sector Equality Act, the Public Sector Equality Duty brackets Equality Act 2010 that you're looking to use as the rules which you have to comply with.
We need to extend the meeting right now. Does anybody want to propose extending the meeting? And seconded by Andrew. And we need to go to a vote to extend the meeting. Maximum of 30 minutes. Okay.
I'd like to make a proposal that we refuse this application, but I would like to ask Simon for help again, just with the wording of the reasons that he suggested might be cited for refusal.
the failure to deliver cycle storage is not supportive of council's sustainable policies and in alternative travel modes, etc., etc. And the failure to deliver the approved landscaping scheme has implications on the character of the site for the benefit of the residents, broader character of the area, policy compliant with backland development. The only other two were access or waste. Parking, I don't think it's necessary, absolutely necessary, because it kind of gets caught up in the character of the area because the scheme goes together with that. But I might be able to find a reason for refusal on parking, but yeah. Parking itself, there's the same amount of parking, it's compliant. So it's dimensions if you wanted to.
And can you confirm that the size of the parking space is compliant with borough standards?
The length of the spaces as shown on the plans that you have in front of you are based on a surveyed plan, so it doesn't actually delineate the parking spaces. It's just the paving versus the gravel. So in that sense, if you wanted to do the paving as the defined parking spaces, then no, it doesn't comply with the standards.
Okay, so I've made a proposal that we refuse this application on 3 grounds. I would like to include parking, as the third of those grounds.
To confirm parking dimensions, not delivery number of spaces or turning or anything, just parking dimensions.
So parking dimensions is not a grounds for.
So what I'm saying, when you said parking, it kind of picks up on the number of parking or the turning and everything else that goes with it. What I'm clarifying is that your concern relates to the parking spaces dimensions.
Exactly. Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
All those in favor of the refusal, please. Those opposed? And those abstaining? The application was refused. And we're up to the next to last one, the Mountain Nursing Home in Wargrave, item 61, application 222456, Simon Taylor.
Again, I'll attempt to be brief, just time-wise. It is not an intention to avoid the issues, but time. The existing site is School Hill in Wargrave. There's the footprint of the existing building and the aerial view of it. Red being the existing building, and the yellow at the rear is land that is currently not occupied, so it's outside the curtilage of the building. The application involves the replacement of the existing care nursing home, which has about 35 units, replacing it with 65 dwellings, ensuite rooms, sorry. So it's a straight replacement of the existing building, no change in use. These are the front and rear elevations of the building, and side elevations. The landscape plan and 3D images of the site from the front and towards the rear of the building. It's the front of the site, School Hill. The school opposite the site is Church of England Primary School. There's 11 objections. The neighbour to the north is, I understand, speaking tonight. The primary issues from this scheme are there are an significant increase in the footprint of the building versus the existing footprint. So that's existing footprint and the proposed footprint. The basis for accepting that is that there's no net increase in height as it presents to the street, and looking at the use and the large ample size of the site, that it accommodates an acceptable quantum of development. The other primary issues are neighbour amenity. The neighbours to the north do have a relationship to the site, but if I just quickly show this photo, there is a significant amount of landscaping along the boundary there. That does screen the site to a degree. There's also conditions in the report that talk about obscure glazing to out external areas. Other primary concern raised by residents is the fact that the construction impact in relation to the school and the length of the development. So the construction management plan attempts to address that in some detail. Other minor issues are biodiversity net gain will be delivered off-site through a Section 106 agreement. But otherwise, it's recommended for approval subject to conditions in the report. Thank you.
The Vice Chair will read one of the residents' requests.
Thank you. Resident Nicola Jordan, who is unable to be here this evening, has asked that the following statement be read. A new development on the site would be out of character with the surrounding buildings. The noise and pollution levels during the construction would be huge, a massive inconvenience for residents and the infant and junior schools. There are 3 people in my household, including myself, who work from home for the majority of the time, and this would prove difficult during such a huge construction. Learning for the children at the 2 school sites would be impacted and disrupted by the noise, etc., when children already have had their learning impacted in the last few years. Traffic and parking are a huge problem already in the roads in the vicinity of the 2 schools. There would be increased traffic, and during construction, heavy vehicles in the area. Pollution levels would increase from the movement of increased traffic. There would be increased noise levels and smells if the site is built, more movement of cars and delivery vehicles at any time of the day and possibly at night. There are already shouts and screams coming from the residents of the home at times. This would increase. Also, extremely loud noise and singing whenever there's a party, event there. Smells from the construction and then possible smells from the care home if it's completed. The pressure on local services would be impacted, e.g. the GP surgery and pharmacy, which are already facing huge demand and workload. I do not believe that there is a need for any more care home replacements locally, as I think that most Wargrove residents would continue living in their own homes in old age. I think it's a case of a large company seeking an opportunity to make more money by taking on residents from out of the area.
And Tim Spencer, the agent.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Edifica, who own over 100 care homes in the UK. Edifica focus on providing modern, sustainable care homes for older people with care needs. I'm joined here tonight by Bruce Walker, the head of Edifica UK. The replacement care home will deliver many important benefits. There is an unprecedented need for care home provision nationally. This picture is accentuated at the local level. The Mount is the only care home in Wargrave and in the north of the borough. Our research shows that at least 5 new homes of this size are needed to meet the existing needs in the area, let alone future demand. The existing home is not fit for purpose. A significant number of rooms are undersized, they do not have step-free access, and many rooms don't have ensuite facilities. The current home is expensive to heat, poorly insulated, and non-airtight. The new modern home would be a highly LNG-efficient building. There's 350 square meters of photovoltaic proposed, along with air source heat pumps and an EPC-A rating. The care home would provide jobs for local people. The proposals will contribute to the council's housing numbers and free up much needed family homes. As your officers have outlined in the other benefits, weigh in favour of granting permission and have accordingly recommended granting consent. We've engaged with officers throughout the PREA, leading to reduced massing and improvements to the quality of the design. We've met with the parish council last week and they indicated that they were happy with the massing and design. Many existing trees are retained on site and supplementary planting will provide additional benefits to residents and provide further screening around the site. Neighbouring amenity has also been carefully considered. The report confirms no unreasonable impact on privacy or other amenity impacts. Officers have noted the sustainable location. The amount of parking has been determined based on the existing ratio of parking to care beds, with this ratio increasing slightly. The amount of parking is increased from 13 to 27 and exceeds the number of staff who would be present on site, which is up to 20. This mitigates pressure on on-street parking. Shift patterns will be arranged to avoid peak hours and school traffic, and a construction management plan will minimise disturbance to residents and during construction. We've been in contact with the school and we're looking to engage with them in the future, bringing the children onto the site and sharing in the construction and other activities of the care home. There's regrettable impact during construction. This will be kept to a minimum. In summary, and in line with the views shared by officers, we consider that there are a number of very compelling scheme benefits. The development will replace dated care beds and provide sustainable improvements to the quality of accommodation, which will provide the type of dignified care which our older residents deserve. We welcome your office's positive recommendation and hope that you'll approve this application. Thank you.
Any members' questions?
Yes.
Sorry, you left this on.
Simon, is this in the green belt? It's not. Okay. The gentleman said that this counts towards our housing target. It doesn't.
Sorry, what was the question?
The gentleman there said it would count towards our housing target. This is a care home.
Yes, sorry, my understanding is C3, so care homes, extra care homes this is a nursing home, which is not self-contained in that sense, so it's just an ensuite, so I don't think this does, no.
So it doesn't. That's what I thought. So they don't count towards our housing target. The gentleman also said we don't have any care homes in north of the borough. We do.
If the north of the borough includes Sonning, then yes, I'm aware of several there.
So, Twyford. So I think he needs to get his facts right. But I think the biggest issue for me here is it will all be the construction plan, because this lane is very congested. It's at school times. I'm not saying this is going to be I'm not looking for it to be refused, but I think we need very strict conditions around that site, because that road is a disaster area, especially at school times. It's narrow. People haven't got off-street parking because there is no off-street parking. There's no parking for school. I know that happens across the borough, but I think my only concern here is that. But we can fix that through the construction design plan. So that's it from me.
Okay, Stephen.
My question really relates to the relationship between the proposed new extended care home and surrounding dwellings. Just looking at the site plan, the relationship to both dwellings to the south and north of the site seems at least worth questioning. The one to the north seems particularly difficult. I'm trying to remember the name of the property that is likely to be most affected by the Beechwood. Yes, thank you. That the new projection towards Beechwood and its fairly narrow garden looks as though it could be quite overbearing.
Is your reference to the wing at the front there? So
it's so this.
Yeah. Okay. So I think the officer report acknowledged that, and it kind of broke down each part of the scheme. There's a diagram there where I've given the dimensions of the setbacks of the boundary. The primary issue here, I think, was that that hedge there is being retained, and the setback is not too dissimilar to what's there at the moment on that, but it's set further back. So the impact is removed. So the existing building would be there, and then the wings further back. So it's acknowledged that it's about 5 metres, which would be overbearing, but if you look at the roof plan there, you can see the slightly complicated roof plan. So you've got 2.5 stories into that area there, and then it steps down to a lower height of 2 stories in height. So that's 2 stories in height with a 5 metre setback from the boundary on a very wide site. Was felt that it was a suitable outcome in addition to
not really extending much higher than what that hedge is at the moment there. Admittedly, landscaping not being a reason for justifying a scheme, but it is there and it's a significant landscape element.
We come back on that. The landscaping that's there currently may well screen Beechwood from the existing Mount care home, but clearly the new build and that arm that comes out is going to be considerably closer than any of the existing building, and that's my concern. Its proximity, even with the boundary treatment, I wonder whether it's going to appear overbearing to residents of Beechwood.
So these two photos here, this is taken of the balcony. Just quickly, sorry, go back. That balcony is at the rear of the main building there. So that photo there is taken from there. That's the view from that first floor of the building. So the building shouldn't be too much higher than this view here. And you're looking out over that hedge is pretty much right along the rear boundary, sorry, the common boundary between the two properties. So it starts at the front of the building, the front of their property, and then extends all the way to the rear. And then the length of that is only for that length there, so about 10, 12 metres, and then everything else is open.
Any other questions? Any proposals?
I would like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation.
Yes. Second. Yeah. All those in favor? Unanimous. And the last one is 22222556304 London Road, Wokingham.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be quick. The proposal involves the erection of a detached bungalow that would be situated on backland area to the rear of 304 London Road and would utilise the existing access from London Road. Due to the backland location, the property would respect and continue the pattern of development that exists along the cul-de-sac of Proctors Road. So if I skip to the next slide over here, the green line outlines Proctors Road. In this instance, the dwelling would effectively be seated towards the rear end of the cul-de-sac and would mirror the position and orientation of number 2 Wood Road Drive. So here is the proposed dwelling, and here's number 2 Wood Road Drive. So it would effectively be seated within the cul-de-sac of Proctors Road. If I switch to the next slide. Concerns are also raised the proposal would adversely impact the character of the area. However, the surrounding area is distinctly varied. The built form, scale, and style of properties along London Road varies considerably. As such, the proposal would not adversely impact the character of the area in this regard. Objections were also received on the grounds that there would be inadequate vehicle access along the site and traffic and safety implications. The access site measures 37 metres in length with a minimum width of 2.8 metres. Gate posts are also present along the site frontage with an entrance width of 4.5 metres. This allows for only one-way access, which is not opposed by the council's highways officer, given the modest scale of the proposal, low traffic flows, speeds, and likelihood of conflict. Overall, the proposal is acceptable in all aspects and complies with national and local policy as a whole, subject to the recommended conditions and completion of a Section 106 legal agreement. I also wish to note that since the submission of the officer report, the council's compliance officer has advised that should contamination be encountered during development, a full assessment of the contamination at the site would be required, followed by remediation and validation, if found to be necessary. As such, an additional condition has been attached to the scheme, which is on page 7 of the supplementary planning agenda. Thank you.
Okay, the agent is Nicholas Cobold.
Good evening, all. I'm knackered. I don't know about you guys, but here we are. Okay, I'll start with a bold statement. 20 years of being a practicing planner, and I think this is one of the more obvious residential plots that I've seen in that time. It's vacant land, it's within the existing built-up area, it's got an established access, it doesn't require any alteration to facilitate the new access. We followed due process in getting to this position. We started with a pre-app. We put forward a 2-storey dwelling, and the advice of officers went down to the single story, to the bungalow, to address their issues. And here we are. I've got a bit of time to just respond to the objections, I think. I know Tarek's just touched on them, but it's worth just reiterating. The main issue seems to be the character of the area. Something which frustrates me to some extent when people allege impact on character of the area without actually saying what that character is. And that's been the case here, where neighbours have said the development is out of character and they've not actually identified what they want it to conform to. Well, here it is. It's a mixed character. When I say that, mixed in use and mixed in built form. London Road to the front, as you've just seen, is predominantly bungalows, albeit some of them have loft conversions. There are commercial uses there, which intersperse between the residential uses, including the vets and the commercial yard to the west of the application site. And then you've got the contrast, Proctors Road, which runs to the rear, characterised by the 2-storey dwellings, which is entirely in residential use. So the neighbours correctly say that the development doesn't relate to the houses on Proctors Road. That's fine. I'm happy with that, as a bungalow will barely be seen between them. And then we get criticised by others objectors who say that the development appears to relate to the adjoining commercial yard rather than Proctors Road. Well, what do you want us to do, really? It does relate to the commercial yard because that's what it's next to immediately. So it does. The officers have summed it up well. It's been designed to fit in with the London Road development rather than the Proctors Road development because it doesn't visually relate to Proctors Road. The building line is important, though, on Proctors Road, and even without the visual relationship, the established pattern of development, as you've seen from the plans, is followed, and the proposal sits comfortably with it. The single-storey nature of the proposal means it can't have an impact on neighbouring properties because there's no first-floor windows to overlook. It can't be overbearing, etc. Just a point on the objectors, all the immediate neighbours to the site, I should say, have not objected to the scheme. They've actually written in support of it. The objections are from further away. So the officers have dealt with all the site-specific issues. Highways has been assessed. You've got the existing access. You've got parking standards satisfied. I should say. Cars can turn, and the junction is suitable. So,
please wind it up to.
I will wind up by saying, please, can we end the night on a positive note with a planning approval, please? Thanks very much.
Members' questions? Wayne?
Right, just so that I'm absolutely clear, if you look at, I'll pull it out. That one with Tarek. Oh, sorry. Well, it's just one of the plans, so it's not, it was before page 369, and it's the red line. 369, so if you look at, well, look at page 369 first, you've got the entrance, correct? Oh no, I'm looking at you, Simon.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah. So you've got the entrance to Blackgate.
Yep.
So, and then you look at the red line. So the entrance is going to be, I presume the entrance is going to be to the side of the existing property.
Yep, towards the bungalow property, yes.
Yep, and it will fit in next to the house number, I think it's 73 Proctors Road.
So not towards the rear boundary, so within the backland area at the front.
In line with number 73.
Yes, not the entrance to the property.
No, the entrance. the entrance is via the London Road, via the Black Gate, via the second. And what's the significance of the blue lined area?
So the blue lined area is within the ownership of the applicant.
Right.
And then to the western side, you have an annex, which operates as a dwelling, and you also have a car sales and repairs workshop.
So how do you get access to that?
So it's through the front entrance. So there's two gates, through the front entrance through London Road. Then you go beside 304 London Road, which is the dwelling. And then it's essentially on the right-hand side is where the property is, the bungalow.
Wayne, I'm very familiar with the site. That's why I've stayed around. The access is existing, provides access to the buildings at the rear. One includes a dwelling that was issued a certificate in 2017, so that is an independent self-contained dwelling. To the left of that, you'll see a box, which is a workshop. It's unlawful, so it doesn't have a certificate, but it is, we've not pursued enforcement action to date. There's a current enforcement case on it at the moment about regularising it, but it has been there for more than 10 years. And then the land is subject to this application. We issued a notice to remove storage of items off that 2 years ago. That was dismissed at appeal. So this site is vacant land that did previously exist behind 306. So all that land was originally part of 302, 304, 306, and that access was created 10, 15 years ago to provide access as the owner of 304 bought all that land to turn into a workshop and various other things. There's no change to access. Access is always existing. And the land was purchased behind 306 about 3 years ago, and will use that existing access.
I don't know if it's me, but it just looks odd the way I'm trying to work this out. I mean, can I ask the question, if this was obviously all in their ownership and they're going to build it for one of their family, and then it all makes sense. But if this is going to be a separate property and you've got this access that comes off this double gate, then goes along, it just seems disjointed. I don't know if does that make sense?
It's a classic backland development that we would oppose quite often because it doesn't meet TB06, which means that it needs to relate to subdivision. But what this site has to its benefit is because there's no introduction of the side access, which creates those kind of side lanes, and which we want to avoid. That already exists. And the other benefit to this site is that Proctors Road, it fits in with the rhythm and the pattern of development. So
I just ask quickly, so the property at the back, is it a commercial with the vehicles to the left, and then there's going to be a residential property to the right? Just safety and access. So if there was an issue with that residential property with the commercial properties, is there access for emergencies for people to get down there, ambulance, fire?
it operates at the moment with the dwelling next door to it. It's unlawful, so we can't control it. There's a current enforcement case that I'm dealing with that is attempting to regularise it, but it's intended to be very well contained within that building itself. It's very low scale. As I understand it, the owner doesn't really have any intentions to do anything beyond personal use or very low scale development. So the conflict in terms of vehicles, almost non-existent.
If we don't resolve this now, we'll have to go to the next meeting. We've got 3 minutes total, so I'll do it real quickly if you want to.
Stephen was first.
Stephen.
I was going to propose that we approve this application.
I will second that.
Subject to the
All those in favor or against?
Yeah.
All those in favor?
Hang on, subject to the officer recommendation.
Subject to the offer recommendation.
Yeah.
Okay. Favor? All those in favor? Good,
Hang on.
good evening.
Okay, we've got one more thing.
One more thing.
Just one more item. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just before we depart, we learned after, excuse me, everyone. Okay, we learned after the our last planning, it's okay, yeah. We learned after our last planning meeting that Mary Severn, a member of our legal team and a very, very dedicated member of Wokingham Borough Council for many, many years, someone who I think has been enormously helpful to the planning committee over many years and has been very tolerant, certainly of the many naive questions that I have asked. I'm sure nobody else asked such naive questions, but it was with great sadness that we weren't able to, that we didn't know of Mary's departure during that meeting. But I would like us to all formally record our thanks in the minutes, for everything that Mary has done, and ask that that extract from the minutes be forwarded to Mary.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, all those in favor? Yes. Okay, fine. We vote. Okay, thank you.
Close the meeting.
And we need to close the meeting. So the meeting is now closed. Thank you.